This is Audible.
Phoenix Audiobooks presents.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is Davy Jones here, and welcome to They Made a Monkey Out of Me. Yeah, it's yet another showbiz This Is My Life. Okay, I admit it. I finally caught the entertainer's epidemic, the dreaded let's put it in a book and see if we can get it right this time itis, as if living it once was not enough. But the funny thing is, reliving it over and over again, to get it all down on paper, has given me a whole new perspective. Frankly, I had no idea I had such a good time. I'd gone to America in 1961 to play the Artful Dodger in Lionel Bart's musical Oliver. I thought it was going to be just another gig, maybe just a few weeks, but it stretched into months and then years. After that came Pickwick, Hollywood, and then all the crazy monkey stuff. And always in the back of my mind was the idea of going back to my old job in the stables in Newmarket to ride some winners. I'd come a long way. I didn't have any set ideas about where I was going, just bobbing along with the tide. But all of a sudden, it was 1966, and I realized I'd got a whole new lifestyle. Something they wouldn't be able to imagine back home in Manchester. I was living in a big house with a swimming pool, free cars, free motorbikes, free cornflakes. Everything we promoted we got to keep, except ourselves. It was a far cry from growing up in Manchester. But there's one thing that I never forgot, and one thing I never will forget. Boy, me mum's pride and joy, the chip off the old block with that. I can dance, I can sing, I can do anything. There's nothing too hard if I try. And if the going gets rough, I can brave it. If I set myself straight from the start. You see, I'm a Manchester boy, me mum's pride and joy, chip off the old block with that. Now when I was 14, I decided to leave. Dad came to wave me goodbye. As I got on the train, it started to rain. Dad, well, he started to cry. As the train pulled away from the station, I shouted, I'll be home soon. You see, I'm a Manchester boy, me mum's pride and joy, the chip off the old block with Dad. Well, I've travelled the world, found me a girl. I come home just once in a while. Relations to meet me, my friends, they all greet me. We laugh, we talk of old times. Changed much around here, except me mum and me dad's passed away. But I'm still that Manchester boy, I'm me mum's pride and joy, a chip off the old block, me dad. I'm a chip off the old block, chip off the old block, chip off the old block, me dad. Da da da, da da. That was then. Factories, rain. What about the workers? Shades of grey. My dad. He'd give advice like a sweet-tasting pill. None of your cod-liver oil stuff about Davy Jones. Just a feeling of strength and security. I remember as a kid holding his big hand and being carried by him. Mine are as big now, and I've carried my own children, so I know. He liked it. Own up. How many of you can remember conking out so that you got carried? First you fake tiredness, drop back a few times and get shouted at, then you get carried. I'd start just around Peter Pan Park, and by the railway bridge near the reservoir I'd be faking it, just to get that feeling of being carried. My dad wasn't a tall man. He wasn't short. Well, he was about this big. What he actually did at British Railways, the tank as he called it, was always a mystery. All we knew was that he went and he came back. He seemed to paint the kitchen for most of my childhood, twice a year regularly as Cup Final and Christmas, until I was about 11. Then he let me help. British Railways cream was the colour. He never changed it. "What colour are we having it this time, Dad?" "British Railways cream," he'd say. "Oh, that'll be nice," we'd all snicker. Mother always stayed out of the way for us. She'd suffered badly with her lungs, emphysema, for as long as I could remember. The paint smell made it worse. On the other hand, she was a very strong-willed person. Emphysema or not, she'd make her point. My father smoked, and Mother disapproved strongly. So much so that one day, tired of him ignoring her, asking him to stop, she bought a pack for herself. She sat down in front of the whole family, and she lit one up. 5 mouths gaped open. This was unthinkable. Besides her illness, she was just too refined a lady to be a smoker. I don't think she'd ever been that near to a cigarette in her life. She held it all wrong. Soon she was coughing and spluttering. Dad ignored the hint, and she lit up a second one. This was too much. Dad protested. "Don't be silly, love. You'll kill yourself." Then she started coughing on the second one. He couldn't take it any more. He got up, he snatched the pack away from her, and started wrestling her for the cigarettes. "No," she said, and tried to turn her head to take another puff. He picked her up and started larking around in the middle of the room. Still holding the cigarette, she fainted right out. Right out of my father's arms she went, like a rag doll. He lay her gently on the settee. She was deathly white, and my dad kept saying, "Doris, Doris, Doris, love." He must have said her name 100 times. Now, looking back at the photographs of their courtship days, I noticed they were always smartly dressed up for each other. My mother never left the house without a hat and fresh lipstick, always a subtle pink, and usually wearing one of those dresses she'd made herself. She made lots of my sister's dresses too. About the only article of clothing that didn't get handed down to me. I was the only boy in school whose raincoat buttoned on the girls' side. During the war, my father had been in the Home Guard, a sort of army reserve, but not exactly equipped to defend king or country in the event of attack. Adolf Hitler would have had a field day if he'd have known. For most Home Guardians, the nearest they ever got to a weapon was a photograph of a gun that the government issued them. Black and white regulation Kodak. Officers got an additional wallet-sized picture of 3 rounds of ammunition. My father's unit, by comparison, was a crack troop. They had an actual rifle and 2 bullets, their pride and joy, until Dad fired one of them by mistake one day. He told us, "They put me in the brig and they fined me 2 shillings and 4pence. His war stories were just great, but my mother was the real hero. I'll never forget her telling us the story about Dad's unit practicing manoeuvres, a right circus. What they had to do was make their way around the houses and get from A to B, on the course without getting shot. They had people hidden with bags of flour. They were the enemy. If they managed to put a dab of flour on your uniform, you were shot, you see. Well, my father always prided himself on being neat and tidy, and he was no different as far as his uniform was concerned. No way was he planning on ever getting wounded, not General Jones. So he was doing great, well ahead of the others, and B was close to our house anyway, so he figured he'd pop in for a quick cup of tea before finishing the course. He had his tea, and he was just nipping out the front door, straightening his cap, all proud of his spotless uniform, when Mother opened the upstairs bedroom window and emptied a whole bag of flour over him. The lot! Of course, my father still had to report to B, right? "What happened to you, Jones?" "A bloody landmine, sir." Now, the Joneses were a typical north of England working-class family. Myself, my 3 sisters, Hazel, Beryl and Linda. We all lived in a crowded 2-up, 2-down terraced house at 20 Leamington Street, Openshaw, Manchester. The 4 children shared a bedroom, a double bed for the girls and a single bed for me. But there was a partition in the middle, you see. Beryl said my talent for entertaining was always apparent. She recalls that I brought the house down in an earlier school play, Tom Sawyer. Me and another kid were supposed to have died and had to lie under a table for about 20 minutes. This, of course, was far too long for me to be out of the limelight. So a very serious scene became transformed as my hand reached up and took a water jug, then a cup off the table, and poured a drink. The audience was laughing so much that they were in tears. I also had an eye for the ladies even then. One time during the Lee Street Congregational Church School play, I was in the wings chatting up some future starlet, age 7, I think. and I was so engrossed in the impression I was making on her, I missed me cue. I was playing Abdullah, the Turkish magician, and I was supposed to fly in on my magic carpet. "Look, here comes Abdullah now," rang out for the third time, louder than ever. Suddenly aware of the situation, I raced onto the stage, panting, and delivered an ad-lib. I was told that any pro would have been proud of it. I said, "I'm sorry I'm late. I got my carpet stuck on Hugin's chimney." That was a factory down the street there. I guess they enjoyed it because they sure laughed a lot. Someone once said that men are born from the womb and spend the rest of their lives trying to get back in. Actually, this womb business was a bit before my time, but I do remember sucking on my mother's breast, and I've certainly spent quite a bit of time and energy trying to recapture that feeling. From about the time I recall my first mate, Harry Hoskinson, I can vividly remember sitting in my pram, looking across at him in his pram, looking across at me, while our mums were nattering about the price of tea, probably. Another bit of mental film from that magical time include the North Country ritual, the stand-up wash. Standing in 2 inches of water in the kitchen sink, being rubbed down with a soapy flannel. Now one day, a neighbour walked in the middle of my rub-down. I was 10, and it was the first time I was embarrassed in the presence of a woman. The second time hasn't happened yet. A bath was something to look forward to. Now once a week, my dad would fill up the tin bath, and there I'd be, in front of the fire, having my back scrubbed and looking forward to the story I always used to get afterwards. My father would do the honours. Usually it was from the comic strips, the Beano or the Dandy. None of your posh stuff, none of that hidey stuff around our house. Chapter 2, North, South, East, West. My first day at school, Varna Street Infants. We played with blocks and had a bottle of milk, which I couldn't finish. Who would have thought by the next year I'd be wanting another? Even in those days I was on doubles. That was when I started drinking. I started out bright. Davy Jones, class 1A. From there on it was downhill. 2B, 3C. Then the 11 plus. To put you in the picture, the 11 plus was the modern day version of the rack from the Middle Ages. The system was that you left primary school when you were 11 and moved on to secondary school where you stayed and finished out your sentence. That would be till you were 17 or 18 if you were smart and you knew what was good for you. Or 15 if you just thought you were smart, like me. Depending on your examination results, there was 2 sorts of secondary schools, winners and losers. The winners, like my sisters, went to Technical, Fairfield High and Spurley Hay Grammar. I got Varna Street Secondary Modern. They call the losers' schools modern, as sort of a consolation prize, but I knew better. The news of my failing the 11 plus was a surprise to my teachers, and the end of the world for me. I didn't want to go out, talk or anything, except maybe stow away on a slow boat to China. China seemed like the only place to go. Nobody there would know that I hadn't passed. "Jones?" "Yes, sir." "Tomorrow you're going to Manchester with some other children. Report to me at the start of the school." What's all this then? They're sending me away for not passing. Next day, me and a couple of the other kids were put on a bus. We pick up some other losers from a couple of other nearby schools and then head into Manchester. They haven't told us anything yet. They're ashamed of us. I try to figure out an escape, but no luck. We're ushered into an old building with the biggest echoes I've ever heard. My grisly imagination is working overtime. If I'd known they would go this far, I'd have tried harder. They sit us down in a room with no windows and they tell us to relax and not to worry. They're just going to ask us 1 or 2 questions. First off, a bloke wearing somebody else's false teeth reads us a story and then asks us questions about what he's just read. The usual stuff. Why didn't Janet invite John to her party? 'Cause she's a stuck-up cow. I didn't say it, but I was really tempted, you know. Then I realised that no one knows where we are. They could bump us off like that, and nobody wouldn't be the wiser. Ooh, I'd better behave. Joker number 2 comes in and asks me to point to north, south, east and west. Is he serious? They've driven us halfway across town. We're in a building we've never seen before. Now this must be a trick question. Apparently not. He's staring at me very serious. Ooh, I'd better think. If I fail this as well, China will probably hear about it. I mentally struggle to think the bus journey backwards to the school. It's impossible. North, south, east, west, sir? A wild guess, pointing half-heartedly. Are you sure? He asks, scribbling my death sentence on his stupid notepad. No, not really, I say. Very well. Just a few more questions. Who cares? I just want to go home. They pile us back on this bus, a typical grey Manchester day, pouring down with rain. It was just the way I felt too. Never heard any more about that Inquisition. I don't really remember too much about my 12th year, the new school. The shock of the 11 plus set me back a bit. I remember holding a spear for gentle Jesus in the nativity play and fancying everything in a skirt. Ah, yes, girls. I remember during PT standing next to Moira, who was the only one in the class with more than just little pimples under her vest, and having a quick honk-honk, showing off for the lads. Well, it was physical training, you know. My mind was on girls so much, I started getting everything wrong. In metalwork, my donut maker would only make the hole. As punishment, they put me in the cookery classes. Oh, no, sir. Please, sir, no. Don't put me in there with those silly girls, sir. The only thing that I enjoyed at school was acting in the plays, being funny in class and chatting up the girls. I'm not sure about the order. The teachers probably thought, well, he's no good at donut making. Obviously, he'll end up in the theatre. Poor little bugger. Why are you late for geography, Jones? I'm not very good at geography, sir. I couldn't find a classroom. Everybody thought I was funny. Bend over, Jones. Out came the slipper. How do you like that, Jones? Not bad, sir. I like the 5th one. That was all right. Again I went. Mr. Withington used to hit me with his slipper all the time. Discrimination, because I took such a lot of time off school to do the plays and readings. Whenever I was bored, I'd say, can I be excused, sir? I've got to learn me lines. It used to really get to him. You'll never amount to anything, will you, Jones? I shouldn't think so, sir. Slipper again. Outside of school, I enjoyed music and chatting up more girls. My sisters and I went to music lessons at the weekends. All 4 of us, back to back. Mum played piano for the local amateur dramatic group. You know, when her health would permit, that was. And I got to play cornet in my dad's British Railways brass band. The damp, foggy Manchester air only served to aggravate my mum's emphysema. There was always an oxygen cylinder by the side of her bed, even during her healthy periods when the spring and summer brought some light relief. And she was in and out of convalescent homes throughout my childhood. I always knew that when the cold and damp months returned, she would be bedridden most of the time, unable to breathe properly. Then everyone would rally round and do their extra share of housework and caring for her. She had a collapsed lung, and the other was ailing. When she was in her early 40s, she was one of 2 people in Britain to undergo a new experimental operation which involved sticking the collapsed lung to the chest cavity wall. The other, a man, didn't survive. The doctor said at the time that she had a tremendous will to live. But her health started to get noticeably worse, and at the same time, hardly coincidentally, my talents for diversion improved in leaps and bounds. While my schoolwork suffered in like proportion, my ability on stage, however, could hardly go unnoticed by the school teachers and staff. So much so that they even started to choose the plays, especially for me. Coming home from one of the dramatic successes, Beryl rushed upstairs, and she said to Mum, who was in very, very poor health, "We've seen his performance. He was great. They all loved him, Mum. He's good enough for television. He really is." To which my mum nodded knowingly and whispered, "He will. He will." She knew inwardly that she would never see me fulfill her prophecy. The next night, on Beryl's 20th birthday, Mum died in bed. Dad came in our room. He tried to smile, but his anguish overtook him, and he told us all, "She's left us." We all broke down in tears. The day before she died, she told Beryl 3 or 4 times not to forget to pay the electricity bill. "It's in the top drawer of the cupboard. Now don't forget it." I can't understand why she was so insistent, recalls Beryl. She was always very methodical, and it wasn't due for about 10 days. Not until 2 days after her death did Belle remember her mother's reminder about the electricity bill. She went to the drawer and found the bill, with the exact money, 11 shillings and sixpence. Beside it lay a magazine cutting, a poem by Patience Strong. Love still abides. She has passed on beyond the range of sight, into the glory of the morning light, out of the reach of sorrow and despair, safe in the shelter of our Father's care. Weep not for her, say not she is dead, for she has gone on a few steps ahead. Faith looks beyond this time of grief and pain. Love still abides, and we shall meet again. Later on, our family doctor told Dad she'd held on a good 6 years longer than he felt humanly possible. I'm sure it was because she loved us all so much. Looking back, I suppose from time to time, married at 28 until she died at 51, her body was just barely able to cope with childbearing and the strain of living in a foggy, cold climate. 6 people in a 2-bedroomed house. She'd fought for so long to live. But finally, her energy had just run out. I hadn't seen much outward affection between them, but the grief her death brought my father was all too plain. I was 14 when she went. For a year before I left home, I watched him struggle alone with his pain. He continued to work at the tank. I took school dinners and saw him in the evenings when I came home. No longer in overalls, always a suit. I could have made a 3-piece suit out of the turn-ups on his trousers. At times I'd come in and see him, head in hand, sobbing like a baby. I can't go on, he'd say. I feel as though my arms had been cut off. Shortly afterwards, through another recommendation, I did my first TV part in June Evening by Bill Norton, of Alfie fame. The producer, Vivian Daniels, passed my name on to another BBC producer from Leeds, Alfred Bradley. He called me to Leeds for an audition, and I stayed on to do a part in a BBC radio play by Keith Waterhouse. It was called There Is a Happy Land. At the time, it was supposed to be the longest part ever written for a teenager in a BBC play. Jennifer Moss had been in the production of June Evening, and subsequently helped me get the part of Ina Sharple's grandson in Coronation Street, Britain's longest-running soap opera, and that was the sum total of my professional training. Instead of going to the Royal Academy, I played a little kid who wouldn't eat his strawberries. Mary Quinn, who played my mum in June Evening, had written me a couple of times saying, "By the way, why wouldn't you eat your strawberries?" At home, we discussed my future. "Well, what are you going to do, Art David?" "I'm going to give this acting a go. I've been earning £11 for a morning story, £17 for a play, £22 for a TV show. Pretty good. But I still didn't actually want to be an actor, partly because that was what everyone expected me to be, especially my teachers at school. So, speaking of horses, my dad was mad on them and thought I could be a jockey because of my size. So I thought, yeah, fool everybody, don't be an actor, confuse the bastards. My dad wrote to the sports writer for the Manchester paper saying, "My son is interested in racing. Bumpty, 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 bump." They gave him the name of a stable owner, Basil Foster in Newmarket. We went along and Mr. Foster thought I'd be perfect. I wasn't going to grow. I was 14 and I was still only 4'5", so he offered to let me try it out for a while. I worked there for 6 weeks during my summer holidays and really got to like it. So at the end of 1960, I said goodbye to school and started working at Basil's Holland House as a stable boy. I was there until May the following year, taking every other weekend off to play radio and TV parts. By now I was really hooked on horses, and I felt I'd like to be a jockey, though I'd never ridden in a race at that point. I was employed mucking out stables, grooming, general dirty work. It was an apprenticeship that served to whet my appetite for the racing life, but at the same time, fate was pulling me very strongly in the opposite direction. Basil, it turned out, was a true ally of fate, and always encouraged my theatrical pursuits. Maybe he could see that was where my true destiny lay. Or perhaps he just couldn't risk having me around too close to the business phone. I happened to be in the office one day when the phone rang. I answered it, and very nearly ruined Basil's relationship with one of the most valuable riders in racing history, Lester Piggott. "Hello? Basil Foster's stable." "Can I speak to Basil, please?" lisped Lester. I must explain that Lester was often seen but seldom heard. "Certainly," I said. "Who's this speaking?" "Lester Piggott," he barked, a bit indignant, but rightly so, I suppose. So shouting past the mouthpiece, I promptly added salt to the wounds. "Basil! Basil!" It was nothing personal, you know. I just thought I was being a funny little guy. Basil put his head round the corner, a bit bewildered. "It's somebody called Lester to speak to you, sir." Basil went crimson. He lurched across the desk and wrenched the receiver out of my hands before I could do any more damage. After the call, he gave me a clout round the ear. I thought I'd never live that one down. Basil always knows I meant no harm, but Lester, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. Basil knew lots of show business people, all track fanatics, so he used his pull on my behalf. Colonel Lay, the owner of a theatrical agency, had some horses at the stables, so through Basil's recommendation, I earned some extra money beating the ground for the Colonel's party when they went out grouse shooting. It's a wonder I'm alive today. Agents are terrible shots. Anyway, Basil talked the Colonel into taking me to London to audition for a part in a new musical, Oliver. It was at the New Theatre. It's now called the Ordinary Theatre. I didn't know it at the time, but this trip was to steer my life in a whole new direction, and very quickly too. The part I went up for was the Artful Dodger. Now I remember singing Consider Yourself and complaining to Beryl, my sister, about the key. I walked out on stage not fully realising what a big deal it was actually to get the chance to audition. There were lots of kids in London who could do the part, but I sang out loud and I felt good. It was a great treat to be in a theatre like that. But I honestly didn't want the part. I certainly didn't expect to get it. I did the song in Cockney, but the words like book, look and cook all came out in Manchester. You know, boot, luke and cook. "Why are you talking Manchester and singing Cockney?" I give up. I shrugged. They laughed at me. I checked my fly. Back to the agents for the verdict. They said if I could get a Cockney accent a lot better than I had it, I had the part. I landed the part of the Dodger, second time around. I'd been in the show for 4 months. The American producer, David Merrick, had started taking British shows over to the States and touring them for 5 or 6 months in major cities before bringing them into New York. With overheads already covered if they made it on Broadway. It was bonus time. It was a Saturday night, and the murmurs started. "Merrick is in! Merrick is in!" I had no idea. I thought they were saying Maverick is in. So after the show, he comes backstage. "Howdy, partner," I drawled in my best Western twang. I'll make him feel at home, I thought. How the hell was I supposed to know that he was big time? "I want you to come over to America and play the Artful Dodger." Thanks very much," I said, kind of casual. Then I started thinking, wait a minute. This is all a bit too quick. I'd have to leave my dad, the horses, fish and chips. "I'm not going," I told Maverick. "Why not?" He was a bit taken back by this. I told him I had to think about it. I talk about being Mr. Cool. But seriously, I just really had to think about it. I hadn't planned this at all. I talked to Basil and he said I must go. "I don't want to go, Governor." I was all Cockney by now. "You must," he said. "Then come back and own horses. There's still plenty of time for all that. But take this opportunity now." And as it turned out years later, I did buy a couple of horses. Chickamono and Pearl Locker, and I stabled them with Basil. But right now, I had no idea that all the craziness that was in store for me. All I knew was that I was going west, I think. Chapter 3. A Dickens of a Time. It was really an exciting time. Nothing can compare with the magic of an opening night on Broadway. Incredible. I was not quite 16 years old. Still had the smell of the horses in my clothes, and there I was looking down into the front row seats at Judy Garland and Sammy Davis. And that was just one seat. My heart started to pound faster, and I swaggered and swayed more than usual. It worked. Lots of smiles and applause. A standing ovation at the finish. What a feeling. There were no reviews to wait for, because the papers were on strike. But we knew the show was a smash. So it was going to be a carefree, fun night. We all went out to celebrate. What a blast. Flowers on the tables, the lights of the city all around, a band playing, all sparkling dresses and dinner suits. My Burton's brown only just made it past the doorman. But I was still only a little fish in a big pond. But I was a different little fish. After a meal, we went up onto one of those big, huge skyscraper buildings, the Time and Life building, I think. As we were looking out over the city lights, Judy Garland put her arm around me and she whispered, "After tonight, this city is yours." I'll never forget that. I didn't think much about it at the time. It sounded so corny. But I must admit, I like it now. And of course she was right. Oliver was a box office smash. For a whole year or more, tickets were like gold dust. A guy called Ward Sylvester, a Screen Gems executive, had come to see Oliver. Now, after the show, he came backstage and he said he'd like me to come to Hollywood and do some tests. Was I interested? Was I interested? Meeting Ward and doing those screen tests was the beginning of an idea and connections that led to the Monkees, though no one knew it then. For me, it was just another diversion and then back to work. But my life has constantly been full of little surprises, and the next bit of sparkle was not far away. The Tony Awards. Georgia and Clive were up too, for Best Actress and Actor, and me for Best Supporting Actor. Looking back, I didn't really understand what an honour that was. I was still only 16. I was in a group with all the others, Best Supporting Actors, and they read out the winner. David... I really did expect to hear Jones. But no. Burns. He was from How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. I was pretty disappointed. I'd rented a tux and everything. Turned out Georgia and Clive lost too. Not one of us got to say our carefully prepared acceptance speeches. We're leaving and Georgia says to me, "I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours." Oliver made it to Chicago in early 1965. The Windy City was right. No matter where you were going, you started off the other way. I met the tallest man in the world, Don Cola, 8'2". We ate together at the Black Hawk restaurant, me in the cellar and him on the first and second floors. Our picture was on the buses. I guess it was a promotion thing for the show or for the restaurant or something. No order too tall for us. Something like that. Big time. Got a free pork chop for that one, every week. Chicago also marked the end of my Oliver run. It was a very sad time. I felt as though I had abandoned the assault, like it was the military I was retreating or going AWOL. But onward and upward, Maverick called. Pickwick was opening, another Dickens show starring the great Harry Seacombe. English cast again, including Anton Rogers, who'd been my good friend ever since. Merrick offered the same money I was making in Oliver, which was then $450 road money, salary and subsistence. I asked for $550, and I finally got it. There was a catch, though. It was only for 3 months. Harry Seacombe had promised the part to the wonderful Roy Castle, since he had played Sam Weller in London. I hesitated at first. You get so attached to everyone doing theatre. I thought it would be difficult to only do it for 3 months and then leave. But I've been trying for the last 4 years to make it to Hollywood. Pickwick was playing Los Angeles and San Francisco, so I joined up. Gillian Lynn was the choreographer. We worked out for about 3 weeks at the Music Center in Los Angeles. I had to dance more in this show, and I liked that. And Ian Fraser was the musical director. There was a dancer in the show who tickled my fancy, so to speak, Ginny, a different kind of woman, bouncy, thin, very athletic. Turned me on just watching her during the show. I couldn't wait to see her afterwards. Squiggly, wiggly Ginny was a teacher. I never enjoyed my homework quite as much. Do it again until you get it right. We had some exciting nights at the Montecito Apartments, LA's Whitby. I had been in company with one other lady in Pickwick, a singer who really hit the high notes. Looking back, it was a setup. I liked her. I also liked Ginny. She, like me, she also liked Ginny. Interesting. So one night we all got together for wine and kisses, and upon reaching the Montecito, the girls popped an amyl nitrate under my nose and took advantage of me. To those of you who are familiar with those little funny capsules, they're called poppers, and no way you can be held responsible for your actions once you get near to one of them. They're not supposed to be used for that kind of thing, but only under medical supervision. They're for getting the heart going, with heart attack victims. They certainly do the job, no problem. They're lethal. Anyway, we all rolled around like kids. I remember it well, because it was the only time I'd ever been in bed with two females. We were all sort of giggly for days. Corruption at last. Pickwick turned out to be just what I hoped it would be. A perfect vehicle for showcasing my talents to the LA set, agents, writers and TV people. They all came to see the show, and they were all impressed with my Sam Weller. My potential was apparent to everyone, but the credit for pinpointing just where and how this new young talent should be directed must go to two young Screen Gems staff writers, Paul Mazursky and Larry Tucker, who came along to see me in the show. They went home, they wrote a script, and we all know what that was. Meanwhile, Pickwick went on to San Francisco. It was great fun working with Seacombe. He joked all the time, blowing raspberries wherever he got me laughing, just to make it worse. In the ice skating scene, my legs had to support the two of us, and while he was struggling to keep his feet, my feet were on the ice. He would press his mouth up against my ear and blow another raspberry. One of those, He'd still be laughing in his high tenor burst as we were wobbling off stage. And on my last night in Cincinnati, I decided I was going to beat Harry at his own game. You see, the scene is the debtor's prison, and how it usually goes is Harry's there with the Pickwickians and the rest of the cast, because he couldn't pay his debts. Now Sam comes down with these sandwiches every night, and he's got this hamper that's full of all kinds of goodies. Mostly it would be sort of apples and oranges and pears and things like that, but I always used to bring chicken sandwiches. Well, this one night I got down there and I opened up the hamper, and I said, "I'm sorry I haven't got the chicken sandwiches tonight, Governor, because I couldn't get the bread." I says, "But I do have the chicken." And I opened up the hamper, and out flew this live chicken. Well, this chicken flew all over the stage. All the people were laughing so much. It was so funny. It went on for about 15 minutes. And finally, Harry turned to me. The audience were waiting for his reply, and he said, "That was a foul trick." It was so funny working with him, and I'll always have a lot of respect for him, especially his raspberries. The show was received very well, and Ward Sylvester played an active part in drumming up a lot of interest at Screen Gems and Columbia Pictures. A big party was given for me at the Beverly Hills Hotel. A lot of debutantes and celebrities, a signing, the launching of an artist. Things were on the move. Hollywood, here I am. Chapter 4, here we come. Colpix Records, Columbia Pictures Incorporated, Screen Gems Music Publishing, all different departments of a whole multi-million-dollar organization were all convinced that their new acquisition, me, this bright-eyed Britisher who had wooed everybody with his performance, was definitely going places. They were looking for a film for me to star in, or the right song for me to record, or the next smash Broadway show, but somehow they couldn't come up with the right combination. Paul Mazursky and Larry Tucker's brainchild, however, was just that. It called for all of my talents, singing, acting, comedy, to be channeled into this one zany television show that simply cried out to be made. The Beatles were riding a wave at the time, and that was far ahead of anything or anybody else, and it was inevitable that someone would try to emulate their successful brand of comedy in the same way that many were already copying their musical style. Mazursky and Tucker were perhaps not the first to come up with the idea, but theirs was the one that clicked. Some of the other key people who did get to stick around for the lion's share were Bert Schneider, the son of Abe Schneider, president of Columbia Pictures. In association with Bob Rafelson, he formed Raybert Productions, one of the first independent companies to take offices in Columbia's lot in L.A. The Monkees was the first venture. Bob Rafelson, a co-producer of The Monkees, a native of New York City, He had a degree in philosophy from Dartmouth College and a master's degree in theatre arts from Columbia University. He played drums with a jazz group in Mexico and did a 2-year stint in Japan as a radio news editor for the Far East Network, at which time he started writing and producing documentaries. Don Kirshner, head of Screen Gems Publishing in New York. Jim Frawley, a 28-year-old dramatic actor who had never directed a TV show when Schneider and Rafelson signed him for their series. Ward Sylvester, employed by Screen Gems in New York, he was sent out to LA as a sort of a henchman to fire most of the executives at Colpix Records. Also, he was my manager, during my Broadway period and also at the beginning of the Monkees. Steve Blauner, vice president of Columbia Pictures in New York. He was Bobby Darin's manager in the early days, and perhaps the only one in the Columbia camp who didn't believe that I was going to be up there. He thought I was too short. Lester Sill, vice president of Screen Gems Publishing. He was put in charge while Colpix was being changed to Call Gems, the Monkees label. There were more, of course, but these guys are the main cast of the story that follows, so stay tuned, and if you lose track, don't worry. It's very simple. Basically, the deal is everybody sues everybody else. I left Pickwick in Cincinnati and returned to Hollywood. Ward Sylvester and I rented a house on Ivar Avenue. I had a single out on Colpix record called Dream Girl, which was doing all right. It wasn't a spectacular hit or anything, but it did get me on the various pop and bop shows, like Shindig and American Bandstand. The songs I was recording in those days were from Don Kirshner's stable of writers, the people who often produced my records as well, usually just one of their own particular songs. Like David Gates produced a couple of things for me, and I was so glad to see that he went on and did the group Bread and songs like If and I Want to Make It With You. They're standards. I still didn't have such a song. Ward started spending a lot of time over at Screen Gems. His old friends from New York were there now. Steve Blauner, Bert Schneider, Bob Rafelson. It seemed that everybody was moving out west. The whole business was shifting from New York to LA, and it was a very productive time to be in California. Mazursky and Tucker were true to their word. They came up with the idea for a show. It was based on the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night. 4 rock and roll musicians trying to make it, living together in a house on Malibu Beach, sea, sand, surfboards, replacing the Pierre Cardin suits with bathing costumes. The 2 up, 2 down terraced houses of Liverpool with a rambling California beach house. Well, maybe it was nothing like A Hard Day's Night. 4 guys in matching suits, I'll give you that. The real idea of the show was a band trying to make the big time. The trials on the way up, all the crazy situations that they could possibly get into. The songs were to be happy, fun songs. Family viewing, right? Now, Rafelson and Schneider loved the idea and gave Ward Sylvester the job of scouring LA's music and theatre scene to try to come up with the other 3 guys. Meanwhile, they worked on convincing Columbia and Screen Gems. So Ward and I started going around the clubs. We saw so many groups, we didn't really know what we were looking for. All I knew was that they shouldn't be too good looking. I didn't want too much competition. I remember we saw Mickey Dolenz in a club on the Sunset Strip owned by this guy, Tony, I think his name was. He looked like your typical movie character of a gangster, cauliflower ear, bent nose, spaghetti hanging off his cigar. Everybody kept saying, "Hey, Tony, hey." If you're listening to this, Tony, I really loved your place. I loved it. Anyway, Mickey was the DJ, and he kept coming up with the stuff like, and round about now we're going to take a pause for the cause, and we'll be back in 5 with more jive. I thought, geez, pause for the cause? Hey, Ward, get me out of this place. Hey, Tony, see us. But Ward seemed something in him that I didn't, and he told us to stick around. Him? You must be joking. Suddenly, though, Dolan's turned sideways, and I see he's got no profile. Skillet-faced. That's what we named him later. Okay, I'm thinking, there's one I don't have to worry about. He's in. So we arranged for Mickey Braddock, as he was called, to come along to the audition. He had actually been a child star back in the 50s with a TV show called Circus Boy, and looking at him, I could see the connection. But he was an experienced actor, and that was good. We got to see some interesting groups doing the rounds. One night we saw the Birds, then Sonny and Cher doing the thing. In those sheepskin waistcoats, the things they used to wear. Paul and Larry were with us, and we got talking about those sheepskin things and gimmicks in general. That's what we need, some sort of gimmick. Well, the name hadn't been thought of yet. There was the Beatles, the Animals, the Birds, the Turtles. So we started thinking of animal names. Somebody came up with the Parrot. Yeah, that's it. You can all have parrots on your shoulders. Not me, man, I protested. I ain't having no parrot on me. It's going to be all over my shoulders. Good job, too. Can you imagine? Hey, we're the Parrots. No way. I know. We'll get a monkey. Sort of a mascot for the group. Suddenly we knew we had it. The Monkees. Spelt wrong, like, the Beatles, the Birds. Everybody was excited about it. Strange tactics were employed to see how they would react to the unexpected. At Mickey's first meeting with Bert and Bob, so the story goes, Rafelson ignored him completely, while Schneider was engrossed in balancing paper cups in pyramid formation on his desk. After a minute or two, Mickey had the presence of mind to grab a spare cup and slam it down in front of Schneider. Checkmate. Apparently it was, or we'd never have seen old Skillet Face on our screens. Peter Tork was a folk musician jamming with various bands in New York, including the Mugwumps, later to become the Mamas and Papas, and the Loving Spoonful. He was friends with Stephen Stills at the time, and the ad came out. Stills had auditioned but was turned down. Supposedly he failed because he had crooked teeth. But he encouraged Peter to try, and as we all know, fate favoured Torkelson. Then there was Mike Nesmith. Lester Sill, Ward and I were down at the old Colpitts Records office one morning to see the certain Michael Blessing. 11 a.m. on the dot, in walks this guy with his jeans tucked into his high cowboy boots, a green wool hat on his head, and a pillowcase full of laundry over his shoulders. Howdy, I'm Michael Blessing. I hope this ain't going to take too long. Got my laundry to do. I didn't like the looks of this. He was slim, dark-haired, and good-looking. After a flurry of questions and sharp-witty answers, Mr. Blessing left to do his laundry. So it came down to a short list of 8. I was always in, because I was already signed to Columbia and Colpitts. It was a question of finding the other 3. But when it was all decided, I felt like I was the odd one out. So I went to see Bob and Bert. Look, I feel weird. This is not the Beatles Mark II. This is 3 6-footers and a short kid. Their answer was that the Monkees should be 4 guys who were so different from each other that if you stuck their heads in the sand with their arses sticking up, you'd know who they were. So that's exactly what they did to us for 3 years. We were perfect. Mike the Texan, Peter from Connecticut, the Skillet from California, and me from Manchester. 4 arses. The pilot was a simple story about a girl who wanted this group, us of course, to play for her graduation party, but her father wanted Sven Hellstrom and the Rhythm Kings. It was shot at this private club on a huge estate. We copied the romp scene straight out of A Hard Day's Night, all sped up stuff with us falling down, doing handstands, bumping into each other and all that kind of stuff. It was real corny, but it worked. I suppose it was the first time it had been done on television. What is not generally known is that around this time, the beginning of '66, several other groups, including the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean, were involved in making TV pilots on a similar theme. But the networks didn't bite, not even for the Monkees at first. After finishing the pilot, we each went back to do our own things, and it was 6 months before anything happened. I kept saying to Ward, "Don't they like the pilot? What's happening? I'm hungry. When do these handcuffs come off?" Rafelson and Schneider were getting uptight as well. They went home one night, got drunk, cut up all the film, and then they thought better of it. They stuck it back together again, in any old order. It worked perfectly, and that's how the Monkee style was born. At least, that's their story. As soon as the commitment had been made by the network, everything started to move fast. Too fast, really. I mean, we'd been thrown together. You, and you, you're Monkees. Learn to play instruments. Now, Mike and Peter were already pretty good musicians. Mickey could play the guitar and sing. He ended up being the drummer, simply because when they asked who wanted to be the drummer, Mike, Peter and I took a step backwards, and there was Skillet Face volunteering. I was given a tambourine. People don't realise what a tricky instrument that is. I still can't play it. We spent 4 hours a day cooped up with each other trying to be a band, and another 4 hours each day with Jim Frawley, who directed many of the first episodes, doing improvisation work with him, learning how to bounce off each other. For 6 weeks we did it. Okay, be a tree. I'm not being a tree. Nesmith wants to be a dog. Okay, be a gangster. Shoot the dog. So Dolan's would do that. He said, okay, you dirty rat. You're the one who gave it to my brother. He would always do Cagney in the show. You know, all that kind of stuff. Whatever we each were naturally good at, really. One day we were all pretty tired. Frawley had been working us very hard, and we decided we were going to take off. Nesmith jumps in the driver's seat, and somebody suggests we get out of Hollywood. We really need a break from this place. I get cozy in the back. Nesmith gets onto the Santa Monica freeway, and for the first time since I arrived there, I'm seeing the LA freeway system. It's by day this time, and it looks really great. Everything's bright and white, and the new gig is starting, and we're going to get something to eat. And all those thoughts are dashing around in my head, you know. This is the first time that the four of us have done anything together. Socially, I mean. I'm looking forward to it. After a while of just dreaming, I see hundreds and hundreds of ships massed over to the right. We're coming into Marina del Rey, and from the looks of it, half the population is living in the water. But more to the point, the water's population is readily available on dry land. The streets are alive with seafood restaurants. Great! This is just what I fancy. Pull up, my woolly-headed chauffeur, anywhere. There's hundreds of them. Oh, boy. In my mind, I'm already tasting lobster drenched in butter. Mickey suddenly shouts, here, here! And Mike promptly pulls into the only Crummies for miles around. Crummies is not the real name, of course. I'd get sued sure as eggs are powder. But it's one of those mass-franchised cheapo family restaurants that America is famous for. The country is inundated with these places from coast to coast, sort of like a certain chain of holiday hotels, only without bedrooms. The food and furnishings are just as awful whether you're in New Jersey or New Mexico. You always know what you're getting, though. I'll give them that. Suffice to say, my dreams of seafood heaven are severely dashed, and I make a mental note to keep this group idea strictly business. Once inside, my worst suspicions are confirmed, and not just about the food. Mickey Dolenz, it turns out, has the worst table manners. Atrocious. He probably still has. Fame has no reputation for changing anybody for the better. But to be fair, I admit, I'm not prepared to find out. I think I've eaten with him a total of 3 times since we met, and that's 2 times too many. They give us 4 plates of wilt called Paradise Salad. Exotically different. There's even a photograph of the original one. I'm sort of playing with my lettuce, trying to find a piece that might put up a fight. Still dreaming of hot, succulent lobster dripping with garlic butter. Just like the ones they're serving up the road, down the road, across the road. I'm not very happy. Slowly, I become aware of this banging noise coming from across the table. I look up, and there's Dolenz, his fork in sort of a caveman grip, stabbing repeatedly at his plate. It looks like he's stamping a passport on a busy day. Every time he spears something, there's half a beat. Then there's a pause while he disposes of it. The salt and pepper pots settle, and then stab, stab, stab again. Really loud, I mean. The whole restaurant's looking at this guy. Who's that? And this is just Crummies, you know. Murderers eat at these places. Dolenz is obvious. Stab, stab, stab. Bits of plate and pieces of paradise flying everywhere. He doesn't care. He just isn't conscious of anything other than getting this garbage down. He's enjoying himself. I can't stand anymore. I put my knife and my fork down and I just stare at him. Stab, 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 he goes on. Slowly Mike and Peter stop talking. Then they stop eating. And now they're just staring at me, staring at him. Stab, stab, stab. His eyes catch mine for maybe one stab, shoveling another mouthful. But without chewing, he glances at Peter, Mike, and then at me. Then chew, stab, stab, one last stab. That's it, I say. I've had enough. I speak up very deliberately, very slowly. Your table manners stink. My dog eats better than you. Deathly silence. That is the worst thing I've ever seen at a table anywhere. Mickey really has no idea what I'm talking about. He looks around. What did I do? You're just disgusting, Dollars. That's all. You're disgusting. Nobody dares speak. I pick up my knife and fork and begin to cut my salad like a surgeon. I've got them right where I want them. Carefully, I place my knife and fork down on the side of my plate. I pick up the oil and vinegar dressing and I apply it liberally. I replace the bottles in their filthy crummish rack. I smile politely at the Three Stooges. Then I pick up the entire salad in my bare hands and rub the whole lot in my face. Then my hair, neck, armpits, everywhere. I've got bits of tomato in my ear, oil and vinegar, all over my clothes. I said, exotically different. The ice is cracked. Pandemonium. You should have seen their faces. Now nobody wants to eat with me ever again, which is just fine with me. On Monday, September the 12th, 1966 at 7:30, the first episode of The Monkees was aired in America. NBC had fired the first salvo of their assault on the hearts of the young Americans. Even the normally aloof New York Times had some encouraging remarks about the unorthodox production style. Progress can turn up in the strangest places, they said. And although the initial Nielsen ratings placed the show only at number 70 in the TV popularity chart, it nevertheless quickly moved up to the top 20, and by mid-season had an estimated 10 million kids glued to their sets every Monday evening. By October of that year, the group's first single, Last Train to Clarksville, was number 1 in the American charts, selling in excess of 400,000 copies in only 3 weeks. A month later, our debut album, The Monkees, also went to number 1 and stayed there for 15 consecutive weeks, eventually selling over 3 million units, more than any Beatles album at that particular time. The only record able to knock it from the top spot was our own follow-up album, More of the Monkees, which zoomed from nowhere to number 1 within a week of its release, greatly helped by the advanced sales of 1.5 million. Also more than any Elvis Presley or Beatles album up to that time. Paul Mazursky and Larry Tucker had written the first episode, but Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, Raybert, then assumed complete control. Mazursky and Tucker retaliated by filing suits, claiming that they were integral to the whole conception of the show. Schneider retorted by claiming he had been working on the idea himself since 1962. Eventually it was settled out of court, and nobody but the parties concerned knows how much Mazursky and Tucker got, but they were never again seen in connection with the Monkees. Raybert represented the new school of radical thought in American television production at the time. They were responsible for many zany way-out visual stunts and camera pyrotechnics used in the show. No 2 episodes had precisely the same ingredients. Raybert tried out new directors from week to week. Film was used instead of video, which gave greater flexibility, allowing new artistic ground to be broken on almost every show. Cameras were sometimes handheld. Film was underexposed, overexposed, turned upside down, even run backwards. Freshly shot material was intercut with archive footage, all of which made for a fast, hitherto unexplored style of television. Most days, we'd do as many as 90 setups, compared with an average of 25 for conventional shows, and the degree of excitement and camaraderie that was being generated by everyone on the set was unique in post-unionized filming. Often, there'd be conversations back and forth between actors and technicians that would end up on the screen. Cameramen would do cameo appearances. We would carry cables. Something special had to be happening for this degree of exhilaration to prevail week after week. It must very simply have been fun for everyone involved, and that exhilaration communicated itself past the screen and was felt by millions of viewers the world over. Don Kirshner, president of Screen Gems Columbia Music, was the other side of the golden coin. the old school of established record industry know-how. It was Kirshner who masterminded the musical side of the operation with flawless, commercially aimed insight. He had wisely decided from the outset not to use Columbia's dying record label, Colpix. Instead, he conceived a whole new company, Col Gems, and arranged a worldwide distribution deal with the then highly effective and efficient RCA company. Now they had an army big enough and experienced enough to explode a phenomenon. With the calculated precision of a presidential election with only one candidate, the advanced publicity machine went into overdrive, spearheading a campaign whose intention was to launch the Monkees as America's answer to the Beatles. Across the country, thousands of DJs were given preview records. Radio stations, record stores and music press all were inundated with bio kits, t-shirts and bumper stickers proclaiming everybody's going ape for the Monkees. Weeks before the first Monkee smile was glimpsed on the television, franchises were being sold that would soon spawn dozens of Monkee products such as chewing gum, green wool hats and electronic dolls that precociously reproduced each Monkee's voice. By the end of 1966, fan mail was averaging 65,000 letters a week, and foreign TV stations were eagerly bidding for rights to show the Monkees in their territory. The series would eventually be sold to 38 countries, and still today it's seen by a whole new generation of Monkee fans all over the world. I remember the first time I heard Last Train to Clarksville on the radio. Mickey and I were in a car. We screamed out with joy and hugged each other. Hearing our own records has never been quite the same as at that moment. Chapter 5, Land of Hype and Gaudy. As Mike Nesmith said, we just had to show up and not be drunk. To the guys behind the scenes, it was like a military operation. They planned it that way. And once we started, it was like being in the military. Everything was clockwork precision. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't a gamble. The Monkees were going to happen. The only question was not, would we make it big, but how big? We did 26 weeks of shooting in the first year. We'd get to bed at 4 or 5 in the morning, and we'd have to get up again at 7 for makeup. It was ridiculous. I'd have to call Ward, my manager, for a diet pill to get me going, then a beer at noon to give it a kick. Not that we were into speed or anything like that, but just to keep going, to stay awake and get those shows filmed. I was late one day, 3 hours sleep. Came screeching up to the barrier in my car. May I see your pass, sir? I haven't got it, sorry. I'm a bit pushed this morning, okay? Can't let you in without a pass, sir. It's the Monkees. We have to have very tight controls. Some guys just take their jobs too seriously. You know what I mean? I stick my head out and I say, see this face? I'm in the Monkees, and I'm late. Would you mind lifting the barrier? Can't help that, sir. Everybody is issued with bang, screech, splintered wood. Great, just like the movies. I got famous all over again for that. I signed what was left of the barrier and had it put up on my wall. Old Jackie Cooper, the head of Screen Gems TV, called me up to his office for that. Didn't go, though. Went for a beer instead. We were always pulling stuff like that. I guess we felt we had to be on most of the time, particularly at the beginning, when it genuinely was fun. I remember when we were recording the first album, Don Kirshner came in from New York to oversee the session. He was responsible for the selection of the songs, and he knew he had hits on the album. A couple of Jerry Goffin and Carole King tunes, 4 or 5 Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart numbers. He knew. The whole thing was sewn up. We were just playing, having a good time. Don didn't even know who Kirshner was. All he knew was this guy came in and he was sitting there saying what a smash this album was going to be. A lot of jive about how we were all going to be millionaires. So Mickey's going over the top as usual, and Kirshner says, I'll tell you what, boy. I'll give you 50,000 right now for exchange for your first royalty check. Mickey just pours a glass of water over Don's head and says, yeah, sure. We had no idea just how big it was going to get. To me, it was just another show, another cast. I never thought it was going to be an ongoing thing. It was around the beginning of 1967 that the music press and national press all started to come down on us. You know, like the proverbial ton of bricks. Their common gripe was that we were musically inept and didn't play on our own records. In fact, some of the headlines, a disgrace to the pop world, silly stuff like that. It was like the press suddenly getting very angry that Raymond Burr was not really a practicing lawyer, or that Ben Casey wasn't making house calls. We were actors in a TV show, period. Of course we didn't play on the backing tracks of those early records. Mike and Peter were competent enough, but as a group we weren't anywhere near capable yet, and the studio couldn't afford to wait around while we got it together. They had to get albums out now. They had shows to film now. We had promotional visits to fulfill. There weren't enough hours in our day as it was. And the thing is, it wasn't unusual. Loads of groups had session musicians playing on their records, including the Beatles, the Beach Boys, the Byrds. At least we owned up. We never tried to hide the fact that we mimed the instruments on the TV show. The pressure to refute our critics by performing live was growing daily. When the day's filming was over, we would rehearse all night to perfect our live show. Soon, on December the 3rd, 1966, we were to play our debut concert at the Miss Teenage Hawaii pageant. The reaction was genuine, full-blooded hysteria described by Billboard as a violent riot with 50 club-wielding cops wailing into the hysterical crowd. The TV show had only just aired about a month over there in Hawaii, but they had ploughed bags of money into promoting the concert. We only did 4 or 5 numbers, and you couldn't hear us for screaming. We were a big hit. A reception party was given for us the next day at a private home on the beach. Lots of island people. It was great looking out the bay-windowed living room onto the quiet stretch of beach, music playing, girls everywhere. I was in my element. Then suddenly, "Hello, my name is Linda Haynes." "Hello, hello, hello." A beautiful girl. Long brown hair and legs to match. I was in love. Unfortunately, so was my aide and bodyguard, David Pearl. Casual talk, bum-de-bum-de-bum. And then she was gone. It's corny, I know, but it really was love at first sight. Later on that night, she turned up at the hotel. My heart started again. Somehow, we all got together for cocktails in Bert and Judy Schneider's suite. Pearl talked more than I did, and she ended up in his room. I thought about it for a minute or two, and then she just became another pretty girl I'd seen. Or should I say, another pretty girl that I'd fallen in love with that day. Except that I woke still thinking about her. Her face, her form, her manner, everything. I couldn't get her off my mind. Pearl and I had adjoining rooms, and the next morning I opened my door, and there she was, coming out of his bathroom. I tried to think of something casual to say as I wandered in, but nothing would come out. "I didn't sleep with him," she whispered as she passed. "I thought you weren't going to stay," I said. "I didn't sleep with him," she repeated. I left. A funny way to start a marriage. Hawaii had certainly had an effect on me. I'd met 2 people who, for vastly different reasons, I couldn't seem to get off my mind. Linda was one, and the other was the Russian poet and defector, Yevgeny Yevtushenko. I don't know why I kept thinking about him, or her, really. Columbia sent me to London just after the Hawaii concert to do a couple of weeks of interviews and promotion for the show. The record company and the BBC had already had a campaign going over there for weeks. "The Monkees is coming" was the slogan. They had ads all over the place and on television all the time. Just, "The Monkees is coming, the Monkees is coming," that's all. So when I got to Heathrow, there was a Rolls to meet me. Record company photographers, etc. I'm in my toy suit, and there's these girls posing with me. Dolly model types, you know, miniskirts, the whole bit. Only these girls are hired. They don't know what's going on. They're standing there, draped all over me, probably thinking, "Who's this little shit?" It felt really weird. Anyway, I eventually get up to Manchester and knock on the door. My dad's pretending he won't let me in. He gets 10 shillings out of his pocket and says, "Go and get your hair cut, and tell him to cut it straight to the wood." "Oh, come on, Dad. Charlie's closed on Wednesdays." He lets me in. "God, dear me," he said. "You look a right mess." "Thanks, Dad. Hey, listen, you're not going to believe this. They're going mad back in the States. I can't walk down the street." "I don't care what's happening in bloody America," he says. "Don't come home with a big head, son." "Yes, Dad." There's a long pause. I said, "I hope it doesn't get too much for you." "Get away with you," he said. And he gives me a good look. "I've lived through much more than you'll ever know." But in a couple of weeks, it was already starting. I returned to the States and celebrated my birthday on the plane over. December the 30th, 1966, 21 today. I'm real tired and I need a drink. so I asked the stewardess to give me a beer. She decides the only thing that she's going to give me is a hard time. I'm afraid I can't serve you alcohol, you're underage. Aha! Got her. I take out my driver's license. Have a look at that, sweetheart. Today's my birthday. I'll have 3 beers, please. What time were you born? The girl's a real smarty, you know. I'm starting to fancy her, too. Very funny, I say. Opening time. Huh? I fancy her even more after the beers. That's when I started drinking. Chapter 6. My dad said, "Son, it's lovely to see you, but bugger off." After the first visit home to promote the monkeys in Britain, I never again saw my father under comfortable conditions. The first show aired in Britain on New Year's Eve 1966. The same week, our single, I'm a Believer, was #1 worldwide. It sold 400,000 in England. That was just in England, in the first week of release, eventually reaching 2.5 million sales. Monkey Mania had hit Great Britain. Scenes rivaling the heady days of Beatlemania were now commonplace wherever the monkeys went, whether as a group or as individuals. My sister Beryl could probably see the effect of this sudden adulation more clearly than I could, at least inasmuch as it affected the Joneses family. It eventually became impossible, even undesirable, for me to stay at the house. I'd recently bought it for my father. Every visit caused pandemonium, and even when I was in America, a hardcore nucleus of fans held vigil outside the house. I mean, you can't ever forget your responsibility to the fans. That's the theory anyway. 98% of the time, I like to think I manage it. All right, you have to balance it. If you try too hard to please, you overdo that. Like Mickey when we were doing the Wembley gigs. We're staying at the Royal Garden, Kensington, and there we are, all drunk, and who knows what else. We stay up all night partying, you know. Then around 8 in the morning, Dolan's is higher than the post office tower, and he announces he's going out to talk to the kids. There are like hundreds and hundreds of kids down in Hyde Park. Princess Margaret sent a letter to complain about the noise. So did I. Yeah, great, Mickey. Go talk to him, cheer him up. So he's in this long black robe, right, some sort of dressing gown, and he goes down there and he gets on the bandstand or something and he starts preaching about love and understanding, giving, caring, sharing. Anyway, he's going on and on down by the pond there. Glorious summer's morning. The kids are on the way to school. Birds singing. He's playing Jesus. They're flocking from all directions. The Sermon on the Mount. 3,000 kids are being told about love by this crazed guy half out of his brains with no sleep. The bodyguards are thinking they need more artillery. It's getting dangerous, of course. I'm on the 10th floor with my binoculars, so I don't care. I'm safe. I think the whole thing's hysterical. Now he starts singing. Everybody joins in. Very emotional. No, seriously. It really was a beautiful thing. Have you ever heard Mickey sing? Moves you to tears. He can make a wall cry. Anyway, the police are pleading. You've got to go, Mr. Dolans, please. Well, the song's over, and Mickey run out of biblical quotes, so he just calmly says, I'm very tired now. I need rest. I have a show to do later. You must make way for me. Right, tell him, Mickey. He takes about 3 steps and the whole 3,000 jump on him, rip his robes to shreds. Well, he sobers up real quick, I can tell you. Later I'm saying to him, come on, skillet face, let's go out, man. Are you crazy? You saw what happened out there? Look, I say, look, it's not that bad. You can go out if we dress normal. Forget the flowing robes and the sermon bit, the camera crew, the lights. Of course you'll get clobbered, but you can do it if you do it my way. Wear a suit, order a Guinness and talk about the price of eggs. You'll be okay, mate. We can't. For Christ's sake, Mickey, come on. We're just ordinary guys. We'll put on a suit, preferably 2. Go down Kensington High Street, into Beaver's, check out the girls. No problem. So Mickey puts on some real clothes, and we go out the service entrance. We're out on the street. We take 4 steps, and there's a half a dozen kids coming at us. 10 steps, 20 kids. We can't go back to the service door. It's locked. So we have to go round the front. Well, there are hundreds of kids screaming and running. It looks like the scene from Jaws, and Mickey and I are the bit on the beach that they're trying to get to. Panic. This is the first time either of us has been on the street in a year. We don't know what to do. Where's the limo? We nip into a pub. More pandemonium. We get out through the side door and start sprinting for the hotel, pursued by this mad crowd. We're laughing, but deep down we're really frightened. We run up to the hotel ramp, and into the side entrance, only to come face to face with 2 plate glass doors, locked, hundreds of screaming fans coming at us. Now this just shows the power of adrenaline. What you can do when you're scared shitless. We pull at the doors, 2 great big 8-foot by 4-foot panels of thick glass, mind you, and the whole lot shatters. We're not even grazed. We're just standing there with 2 handles in our hands. Sheer terror did that. We dash through and make it safely back to our rooms. Hello, room service. 2 doors, please. While we were at the hotel, our names would ring out from hour to hour on the street down below. Davy, Davy, Mickey, Mickey. I developed agoraphobia for a while. At least I think it was agoraphobia. Which one's that? Crowds or open spaces? Well, I had it anyway. I had them all. We used to wall crawl around the hotel, sliding around from room to room so nobody saw us. It got to be a game, actually, because we always had the whole floor anyway. With a platoon of armed riot police guarding the elevators and stairs, only a highly trained guerrilla terrorist troop could have gotten in to see us, usually. I got a call from a doctor in a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona one time. How he found me, I don't know. But here he was on the other end of the line telling me about 2 little girls who were crossing the road with monkee albums, which they'd been out to buy, and they got run over. One of them had very bad leg damage, and the other had been unconscious for 6 weeks. Well, now she comes around, and they're playing monkey records in the hospital, and the doctor calls to say just the greatest thing for them both is if Davy Jones would come and visit them out of the blue. Well, you get a lot of this sort of stuff, and it's really hard sometimes, but this guy really is genuine, I can tell. So I say, I'll come if he'll promise not to let the press know. Right. Boy, is he excited. We have a deal. I get on a plane to Phoenix and I go to the hospital. I must admit, I'm pretty excited myself. Just thinking how excited these girls are going to be. You should have seen their faces. And now I know how Santa Claus feels. You can't measure moments like that. If I had to fly twice around the world, it would have been worth it. So we have a little group picture taken and I meet their families. Both girls live on the same little street in Phoenix. Real homey. It's all very moving. It felt nice. Then a couple of months later, I get invited back to the little girl's house for dinner. The one who'd been in a coma. And I think, yeah, that'd be nice. Go and have dinner. And see how they've been going. So there I am. And at dinner, this 65-year-old guy, Tiff, and his wife Clara, he's thin as can be. He's got emphysema just like my dad. They both live out in the desert. Now, I don't know why, or maybe I do, when I think about it, but I found myself on a plane to Phoenix a couple of times. I wanted to see the kids, sure, but I really wanted to see Tiff and Clara in their tiny little house at the edge of the desert. Chapter 7, Sue You, Sue Me. My dad said, throw your arms around, son, they'll think you've got money. And what's this? Jackie Cooper had called me up to his office again, this time to wave a newspaper at me. An Irish raincoat? I give up. North, south, east, west. It's disgusting, that's what it is. You're bad-mouthing the studio, David. We can't tolerate that sort of thing. Well, apparently I'd mouthed off to the press again, complaining about the sponsors or something. And they had said, well, didn't the monkeys get given 4 cars by Pontiac for their personal use? Like, did I complain when they gave me a car? And I'd said something like, no, but that doesn't mean that they own us for a lousy car. And in any case, the studio had 41 cars, 6 elephants, 2 Boeing 747s, and an Apollo spacecraft. It was childish, but they were treating us like children. I shouldn't have got upset about it, I suppose. I mean, it's nice people giving you things, isn't it? But then if they turn around and say, you owe them for it, that's different. It's manipulation. But back then, it was a shame, really. So much good stuff happening to all of us. And I meant all of us. The network, the label, the writers, producers. Hey, it was a nice thing. It was happening for everybody. It was fun. It should have stayed that way. Why not? Why can't it stay that way? Whenever there gets to be millions flying around, instead of everyone enjoying it, they all start suing each other. There was so much strain coming in from the whole thing. Lawsuits all over the place, just a load of greedy kids with every toy in the store yelling for more. It was really starting to piss me off. Kirshner was suing Screen Gems for about $35 million, I think it was. Something reasonable like that. Mazursky and Tucker were suing Raybert Productions of the show called Liverpool, USA, for suing Columbia for supposedly stealing their idea. When it was all inspired by the Beatles anyway. Everybody was screwing everyone else. As soon as they got half a chance, nobody seemed to care. In all this time, the most I'd sent him a dad was £7.50 a week, about $10. It was all he'd accept. So at the end of February 67, after we'd done the first 6 months of the Monkees, I had some time off and I told Ward Sylvester that I wanted to go home to England, supposedly to take a holiday, but really I wanted to buy some gifts for my family and deliver them personally. So Ward went and spoke to Columbia, and we ended up discovering some pretty incredible things. I wasn't under contract, at least not securely as far as Columbia was concerned. I was still on the old Colpix recording deal, and that was running out soon. Well, I didn't want to hold them for ransom or anything, but I mean, we could have come away with a good deal right there and then. One that would have been fair for both sides. But Ward was associate producer of the show now, so he wasn't about to rock the boat, you know. I think you'd call it conflict of interest, trying to represent me and them at the same time. What happened was Columbia gave me $25,000 to go home with, as an advance against royalties. Well, I was young and pretty inexperienced in those matters. All I'd done before was stage acting, a little recording on Colpix, but no hits. This was the big time. I should have got some heavy representation, because there was millions at stake, and I knew nothing about publishing rights, royalties, residuals, merchandise, etc. 25 grand sounded like $1 million to me right then. I was impatient. I just wanted to get home and throw my arms around. So, I signed a deal. A whole load of new contracts giving them my exclusive services and making me a contracted member of the Monkees on a basic salary of $450 a week, period. Probably I wouldn't have if I'd have known how to handle myself. But I was rushed, and I got the impression that if I didn't sign, I couldn't get my share of the royalties off the first 2 albums. Not true, but what did I know? I thought I was being taken care of. Well, that $450 a week covered all the concerts, live appearances, everything. We were on salary, no percentages of the gate like groups these days. On the very last tour we did, Japan and Australia, I personally saw $90,000. And then on another night, $60,000 being counted out in our hotel room. And that was the last time I saw it. But anyway, for the time being, I got my 25 grand and I went home. I threw my arms around that time, all right. Bought my dad a house, my 3 sisters a present each. I purchased 2 racehorses, Chickamono and Pearl Locker, to stable with Basil Foster. And I was broke again. Just like blowing your Friday night's pay at the pub. But that's all right. I'd done just what I wanted to do. I'd bought my round. No problem. It was July the 1st, 1967. It was hot. London's Empire Pool Wembley was jammed with 10,000 hysterical teenagers, just as it had been in the previous night and would be for another 3 shows, all sold out. The Monkees were playing 5 concerts in 3 days, and by the time the riotous scenes had died down, 50,000 screaming fans had turned out to see us. Monkee Mania had hit England. Backstage, I had asked for a telephone to be installed as close as possible to the stage. My father hadn't been able to come to the concerts because of ill health, but my sister and all her friends, practically the whole street, had come down from Manchester that morning in a chartered coach and were staying in London for the weekend. This was a special occasion. It was my triumphant return home. "Okay, me old mate, this is it," I shouted down the line, laying the receiver on the table facing the stage. The Monkees then went out to be greeted by a roar, an almost solid screaming sound, but it was music to our ears. An hour or so later, in spite of the persistent demands for yet another encore, the show finally ended, and we came off stage for the last time. My dad had been on the other end of the line all this time, and I grabbed the phone eagerly to get his verdict. "What the bloody hell was all that about?" he said. "What a bloody row. You mean you came all the way from America to do that? You must be bloody joking." Pause. And then he said, "Mind you, that Lulu was good though. I'll tell you one thing, son, she can't half put a song over." I laughed. I should have known better. "Well, as soon as I've done another 3 of these bloody rows, I'll be up to see you, mate, okay?" Now, despite this outward show of indifference, my father was actually fiercely proud of me. "If you see those bloody Bee Gees, ask them if they got my letter, will you?" He'd read an article where various music business people were knocking the Monkees, saying that they didn't sing on their own records, etc. And apparently the Bee Gees had said not too complimentary things about us. So Harry sent them a note, to the brothers Gibb, of course. A nasty letter it was. "You don't know what you're talking about," he wrote. "You're all on bloody drugs." What a laugh. I guess Linda and David Pearl dated for about a year. I don't know exactly. I kind of stayed out of the way, although I always saw her around LA. I covered up my feelings, but like Mickey said to me, "Don't you know what it's like to be a good loser?" "Yeah, Mickey," I said. "It makes me feel sick to my stomach." She was mine, and I didn't know how to tell her, him, or me that. Linda Haynes Jones said, "When David Pearl came back from the Monkees European tour, he and I dated for about 8 months, so I was always over at Davy's house, 8571 Franklin. What usually happened was that I and Davy's date for the night watched TV, and Davy and David would play pool. I hadn't been over to Franklin for ages when, out of the blue, Susan Haffey, who I'd met at Peter Talk's house one time, came into the store and we got chatting. She said she was working for Davy now, cooking at his house, and why didn't I come over sometime, so I did. As it turned out, Davy came home early from the studio that day, and he was very surprised to see me there when he walked in. I was embarrassed by his surprise, so I offered to go, but he insisted that I stay, and then he promptly took a nap. It was really a fateful night, because David Pearl and some friends turned up unexpectedly too, and there we all were around the dinner table. I'm sure Davy relished the situation and probably used it to spite David Pearl, but whatever the reason, I too relished it, and when in a loud voice in front of everybody Davy asked me if I would like to go to a movie, Pearl said he'd been thinking of seeing something too, but Davy made it clear he meant just the two of us. Talk about an atmosphere. We left the party and went to see Bonnie and Clyde. Then after the movie we went to see John Lee Hooker at the Ash Grove, an old jazz R&B hangout, now the Improvisation Club. When we got there, Davy found out he had no money to get in, so I had to scramble around for quarters. We went back to his place and watched TV for a while, and then I asked him to take me home. He was very gallant. We kissed a little and then said good night. I didn't expect to hear from him again, but a week or so later he asked me to a party that someone was throwing for Donovan, and 2 weeks after that we were living together. Well, how good is it supposed to feel anyway? And what did I do to make things work? To be honest, I wasn't really looking to make things work. Things always worked for me. They seemed to fall into place. I'd always been taken care of. People would say, come to me, I'll handle your business, your career, your life, or someone else there, like a foreman in a factory, except that the foreman doesn't go home with you. In show business he does. He's always calling you up at home. He's your manager, your agent, your producer, your director. Whatever he is, he doesn't stop. He's with you all the time. It's like doing a regular job. There's always someone there, a second opinion, someone to do the doing. So when all of a sudden the thought of marriage pops up, there was nobody there to tell me what to do. I was still leaving the decisions to everyone else, so I treated Linda like I treated everyone else. I didn't make her important enough. I didn't touch her, disclose to the world that she was mine and I was hers. She and I had so much time to develop a relationship that we didn't develop one at all. We didn't know how to. It wasn't easy for her, let's face it. Nobody was supposed to know that we were together. Whenever she flew with me, she'd have to take a different seat, or preferably a different plane. Later, even after we were married, she couldn't put Linda Jones on her luggage tags in case someone found out and leaked the news. I mean, it was tough. And looking back, I don't know why it was that way. Just me letting them make the decisions as usual, not asserting my own wishes. I didn't want responsibility. I couldn't deal with it. There were weeks without smiles. Linda used to sit on the stairs a lot. I didn't know why, nor did she. We were both confused. What we needed was a great big hug, and we got one. Our daughter, Talia. Chapter 8. Daddy's Song. I guess it's nice to have someone to love while you're looking for someone to love. You see, I thought that having a baby and getting married would be a good responsibility. I thought it would make me take the initiative, be decisive, but when you've never done it before, it's not easy. Linda travelled to England with her sister Janet to have the baby at the London clinic. Dual citizenship, English passport, nice I thought. Meanwhile, I was halfway around the world. We were touring Australia and Japan, September, October, 68. A girl, Janet said to me on the phone. A girl? Oh, no. Well, I don't know why I said that. Probably nerves. The excitement of a first child, you know. A girl. Oh, boy. Was what I was really thinking. I celebrated with a bottle of sake. Well, maybe 2. Talia was born on October the 2nd. 2 weeks later, as soon as the tour was over, I flew straight to London. But instead of being able to rest, and savour the happy event, I was greeted with the news that my father was very ill. I flew immediately to Manchester, just in time to see my dad carried on a stretcher into an ambulance. He always used to joke about how they'd have to give him a shot to put him away. As I climbed into the ambulance and knelt next to him, he shook his head. "I'm done for, son. Tell him to give me the shot." And then he smiled. My father knew very little about Linda and nothing about the baby. He hadn't even known that Linda was pregnant. I'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him. Now that Talia was born, I was hoping to present my father with his first granddaughter, but because of his critical condition, the time was not right. I flew to Manchester to visit my dad in the hospital every day and back to London each night to be with Linda and Talia. This went on for about 2 weeks, and then one day before I was due to return to the States for a commitment, my father seemed much improved. Linda and Talia and I flew to Los Angeles. The moment we arrived, we got the news that Harry was dead. I turned around and flew straight back to England, alone. My sister Beryl recalls, "We were all at the house in Manchester. Hazel had made the funeral arrangements for the following week. We were going to have a wake, as we did with Mother. David arrived, white as a sheet. He gave us a wink, saying he's all right now, but he didn't cry. I was so angry at myself. Sure, I had commitments back in Hollywood, but they weren't as important as my dad. My dad ill in hospital. If that had happened today, I'd have said, screw the shows, I'm staying with my dad. But I was a kid being led around. Do this, do that, don't say a word. Don't say a word about being married. Don't mention about your dad dying. And I was stupid enough to obey. I didn't know any better, but I should have. The day before he died, he gave me the thumbs up and a wink. He always used to do that. It meant, go get him, son. Everything's fine. And I just thought, okay, it's all right. I'll go get him. I didn't want anything to do with a wake. To me, it was no time to sit around with a bunch of people drinking tea. I'd experienced that when my mother had died, and I wasn't about to go through it again. Consequently, I offended many members of my family by rushing the whole thing through within a day of my arrival, and then leaving the country as abruptly as I had arrived. But it was the only way I could deal with the situation. Years later, after the ill feelings had mostly worn off between me and my sisters, I visited the grave a few times with Beryl. I have a plot already purchased for myself, right next to me mum and dad. In fact, I try it each time I go. Beryl gets embarrassed and starts looking around to see if anyone's watching, me lying down there among the graves. It's ridiculous. But it's best to check these things, you know. I don't want a grave that doesn't feel right. After all, I'm going to be there for quite a while. One day we're there and an incredible thing happens. I'm lying in my spot, just testing it out as usual, and we hear this announcement over the public address system just near the railway station. Harry Jones, will Harry Jones please report to the main office? Thank you. Beryl and I look at each other with amazement. We both hear it far off and as clear as a train whistle. We decide that there must be a lot of Harry Joneses, but then we realise the railway station has been closed for years. There's nobody there. Whether the determining factor in my marriage to Linda, my father's sudden death, Talia's birth, or my impending US draft induction, I cannot actually recall, we had planned to marry anyway. Only 5 days after my father's death, and on my parents' wedding anniversary, October the 31st, Linda and I drove over the Mexican border to wed secretly in Tijuana. My friend and business associate Lindy Getz was best man. Talia, aged 4 weeks, was the only bridesmaid. A funeral, a wedding, a close shave with a draft board. Now, if you don't think everything's happening at once, forget it. Back on tour I go. 38 days, 36 concerts. Hi, honey. Yes, it went fine tonight. How's my baby? Did she ask where her daddy was? No? That question will come later. Chapter 9, Zilch. The letterhead on Ed Justin's business stationery bore the legend, Monkey Business is Big Business. Honest Ed Justin, as he liked to be known. He was in charge of the merchandising, and everything that could possibly be sold with the name Monkees on it, no matter how tenuous or improbable the connection, was sold. In the first year alone, revenue from the Monkees merchandising grossed an estimated $35 million. The arsenal of monkey-associated stationery, toiletries, clothes, foods, kitchenware and other knickknacks was impressive. and the market was so glutted that it would probably be easier to name the one or two items that didn't feature in the nation's shop windows or mail order ads. Inquiries have revealed no monkey enema bag, and it seems that the United States government really missed out by failing to clean up with the Mickey Dolenz ground-to-air tactical nuclear missile. But that's it. Just about everything else was covered. Still, Justin kept a tight rein on any and all promotion schemes that came across his desk, and made sure that anyone who stood to profit from connection with the monkees was licensed by him first. There was certainly no shortage of ideas. The ingenuity, or the greed, knew no bounds. Win their hair, proclaimed one tabloid of the day, in packets, with a guarantee signed by the hairdresser. And for those who couldn't risk not being one of the lucky winners, there was a fail-safe buy a packet. Be sure to specify whose hair you want. Just $1 each. Yes, each hair, that is. I was in the office in New York once. It was more like a supermarket, actually. Rows and rows of monkey stuff, clothes, pots and pans. Anything you could think of. Well, they just didn't all of a sudden come up with a warehouse full of monkey love beads and calendars, did they? Most of it was all merchandise that they just sitting there, waiting for the next big name to be slapped on it. They'd use it for the Beatles and Elvis, probably use it for Elvis again when he died. It's just whoever's in the office at the time. We were very foolish about all that stuff. Even Mike and Mickey, who usually handled their money properly, were green as far as merchandising rights were concerned. We were all handled by different managers, and there was no strength, no unity between us. As it started to happen, and it started happening pretty quick, we were none of us prepared. I mean, the guys behind the scenes knew all too well. They all had their game plans ready. They asked us what we would like from the merchandise sales, a lump sum cash advance or a deferred percentage. We looked at each other and shrugged. Cash didn't seem too clever an idea. We'd only spend it, so we said, percentage. But what we didn't stop long enough to think about was that all the limousines, the Learjets, the five-star hotels, the whole lifestyle, the image was being charged to us. Everything. Even phone calls that we made from the office. It was all knocked off the top, so it often ended up that there was little or even no percentage left. We should have taken it up front, cash first, and then let them get it back. But that was our own fault. For myself, that came from my childhood. We never had anything on HP. It's layaway. We couldn't pay for it right out. We wouldn't have it. Something wasn't quite right, though. I missed out on all sorts of investments that I should have been in on. And those I was in on, well... We did one episode where we were Errol Flynn-type pirates. It was filmed on an actual galleon. The four of us were so impressed by the ship that we offered to buy it for $100,000. But the ship was booked for one more film project, so we couldn't take immediate possession. Anyway, we had all the papers drawn up, and the next day, the ship sank. It's funny to look back now on the money side of it. It was just like Monopoly. There were so many people advising, all talking, and nobody saying anything. Ward Sylvester was my first manager when I came to LA. And then the monkees started. He became an associate producer of the series, and I had pretty much to fend for myself. I then had a whole string of managers who had no great concern for me personally and were just in it to make a fast buck. Al Kahn was classic. He wouldn't let anyone near me. Any newspaper wanted to interview me, he'd say, "I am Davy Jones, speak to me." I gave him $63,000 one day to buy me a house that I'd seen. I didn't have time to mess with all the business stuff myself. We were filming, rehearsing, touring, saying cheese all day. Anyway, that's what you pay a manager for, right? So I'd been living in this place for a few months when I noticed the bank statement. And one day I see that these payments are going out every month, and I don't know anything about it. So I asked Con, "What are these?" "House payments," he says. "But I own the house." No, not exactly." "Well, what do you mean, not exactly? What happened to the 63 grand? "Well, orange groves in Florida. A great investment, David." I never saw one orange, and I had to pay a mortgage too. This sort of thing was happening all the time. A little bit here, a big bit there. He brought 2 women out from New York to work for something he'd set up called Davy Jones Enterprises. He wanted me to think about going solo. So these girls are in LA working on some promotion thing. My favourite monkey, Davy Jones. Something like that. Anyway, I'm in the office, and Con's out on a business lunch, somewhere. I don't know, Hawaii, I think. And these 2 girls start telling me about all these things he's up to. Sort of putting me straight, Suddenly, I see the light. I'm really pissed. They're telling me incredible stuff about where the money's been going. So I figure I'll empty our joint account so he can't buy any more fruit over the weekend, right? Only I don't have my bank account stuff handy, and my bank's in New York anyway, and they're closed by now. So I know it's done, but what can I tell you? I put it in one of these girls' savings accounts, safe until Monday, surely. Then I'll transfer it and find my manager. Well, Monday turns up, but the girl doesn't. It's difficult, you know. So many lights. It just happened to keep seeing the wrong one. Meanwhile, the remaining girl, Helen Kensick, who's been my fan club secretary during the Oliver days, asked me whether I'm aware of the fact that I had just recently bought $13,000 worth of furniture for my manager's pad. Well, the place needed it. All he had was an orange crate. I figure I needed help for this one. There was this guy, I used to call him the inspector. He'd been wanting to represent me. I knew he'd love to see Mr. Furniture out of the picture, right? So he had this plan. We got around to the sheriff's office, explained the situation, post a bond of $13,000 and take a ride over to the manager's place. He's still out, right? He's at a long lunch. They're having dessert in Tokyo. The sheriff helps us load the truck up with the furniture. He loves it. He thinks this is real funny. And I leave the note. You shouldn't take such long breaks. Eventually, my soon-to-be ex-manager and his wife, Sally, get back from China, egg foo young, to take away, please. They notice something's up right away. The place is clean. Boy, that new maid is thorough. Well, he figures it out from the note. And he sends 2 sheriffs round to my place, with Sally along for the ride. I'm at the studio, but Linda is home and she lets them in. They know they can't get the furniture back. I've got a bond on the stuff, but Sally claims that I've got a set of 6 gold-plated mixing sticks, drink stirrers. They belong to them. Actually, I'd given them to him as a gift, and I was so pissed off at what he'd done that I took them back. So while they're walking around looking for these mixing sticks, Linda calls me at the studio, of course. I blow up. Get them out of there. They've got no right to be there, nosing around. Well, they said they just wanted the mixing sticks. So I tell Linda which drawer that they're in, and she goes to get them. But Sally is looking through the drawer. Not there. Second drawer, not there. Third drawer, shit. There's a little sieve in the corner with just some seeds and stems in, no grass, but Sally sees it, and she goes into the other room to tell the sheriff. Linda's back on the phone to me and tells me what's happening. Poor Linda scares stiff, but she goes and gets it and throws it into the kitchen garbage. Sally tells the sheriff that it was there a minute ago. They ransacked the place. Linda's hysterical. I'm on the other end of the phone, wondering what it's going to be like in San Quentin. Well, they find it. Big deal. 8 seeds. The sheriff gets on the line. Mr. Jones, we'd like you to come over and help us find these mixing sticks. Sure, I said. And the Pope's Jewish. Yeah, I say, I'll be right there. Shock, horror. The studio immediately closes down. Everybody goes straight home. The producers, the crew, technicians, the tea lady, I mean everybody. 10 o'clock in the morning, finished. Paranoia. Mass flushing of toilets. Nothing like this has ever happened in connection with the monkees. Now, Paul McCartney had told everybody that he'd taken LSD, fine. But if the press asked if we took drugs, we just said, oh yeah, aspirin. Once I think I admitted to taking a little X-Lax, maybe. So the whole set was closed down for a day. Linda was arrested, but I spoke to her first on the phone. Don't worry about it, I said. Don't say a word. Don't say anything. You don't know anything. I'll set the wheels in motion. I immediately got hold of Harry Stumm. In exchange for handing over $6,000 to pay off certain people, he wouldn't tell me who, and frankly, I didn't particularly want to know. Linda wouldn't spend the night in jail. Sure enough, she was released from Sybil Brand prison at 10 that night. I stayed in hiding at the Bel Air Hotel for 3 days while Stumm sorted things out. I had to write another check for $14,000. Where that went, I don't know. Boy, did his fee jump up. He must be getting the hang of this lawyer business. $20,000 altogether. But for that, everything was kept quiet, and I didn't get busted. Some months later, Mickey was motorcycling down Sunset Boulevard, committed a minor traffic violation, and was stopped and searched. They found 6 joints on him. I heard it cost him $3,000. No prosecution. It's true what they say, money talks. But how come his speaks much louder than mine? He pissed me off. All that because I took the advice of the inspector and went after a few sticks of hideous furniture, which just ended up in my garage for months. Eventually I gave it all up to Goodwill anyway. So the inspector was the next one. Peter had introduced me to him. He didn't buy phantom orange grows or anything like that, But he did make a few business decisions which seemed to me not too smart. Mind you, so did I. I gave him power of attorney, and against the advice of my dear friend Fred Harris, turned over my New York bank account to him. Will I ever learn? He gave me some brilliant financial advice, I must say. Only my opinion, of course. But I think 10% of Jeans West would have been worth a few bob now, don't you? I was offered that deal for only $10,000 when they were just starting up. Jeans? No way, they'll never sell, he said. Same again with Fujifilm and Mattel Toys. Thanks a lot. Then one morning I go down to the mailbox and open up the royalty check. $240,000. I'd made almost $250,000 before breakfast. I went back to bed. I'd had a hard day. But the point is, when you get money like that, it should be invested, sheltered, deferred. It seems to me that that's the manager's job. But no such advice was given. And I just paid a huge amount of tax straight off the bat. It's dumb. Now, when it came to the poor gardener trying to get $37 out of me for some dichondra, that was a different matter altogether. No way was the inspector going to let anyone get away with that sort of thing. He would write letters all day about that stuff, you know, no problem. So I think it was a matter of priorities, you see. He was pretty busy at the time working on another project, a low-budget film that Peter Fonda had made. The inspector did the deal with Ray Burton Columbia to distribute the film. It did pretty well. It was called Easy Rider. I didn't see much of the inspector after that, or Bob and Bert. They got their Easy Ride and they took it. You can't blame them. Bob and Bert had put up $250,000 of monkey profits for a share in the film, and thus launched a whole new career for themselves in movies. Rafelson became a respected director with 5 easy pieces and Drive, he said. And together with Schneider and Steve Blauer, he formed BBS Productions. In a radio interview, this guy says to me, he says, "A lot of people would be surprised to think that you came out of this whole thing with so little, compared to millions that the monkeys generated. Does that bother you?" My answer was, "Not at all. Could you lend me $10? Chapter 10. Monkeys is the craziest people. Everywhere the monkeys went, they were front page news. In London during the Wembley concert, the fans outside the hotel prompted the letter from Princess Margaret and caused total chaos for the traffic. My arrival at London's Heathrow Airport caused a riot of such proportions that it was mentioned in Parliament and resulted in a government inquiry. In America, scenes of hysteria greeted us wherever we appeared, and our concerts were sellouts with hours of tickets going on sale. It's easy to see why Tork and Nesmith felt that they could use their popularity to twist certain arms and win the musical freedom that they had been promised. They needed to prove to the critics, who were crucifying them for having hits that they didn't write or play on, that they were capable of creating far more artistically valid material. It's also easy to see that Kirshner's expertise in choosing commercially viable material had been a governing factor behind our phenomenal record sales. Peter Tork said, "We were getting on each other's nerves, and suddenly Davy was shouting and cursing everybody in general, or whoever was in his line of fire. I went over to try to calm him down. 'Get out of here, you twit,' he screams. I didn't move, and the next thing I know, he hits me in the mouth with his forehead. A nutter, as the English call it. So we started at each other, arms flaring. The crew broke us up. We were held off each other by about 3 men apiece, still glaring and struggling to get loose. Finally, we calmed down. 'Okay, Peter, okay. Okay, Davy, okay.' But we're good actors, remember. As they loosened their grip, I got free first and slugged him as hard as I could. I was surprised. It felt good, Peter said. Meanwhile, I had to go off to the hospital. I got 7 stitches above my eye. The filming continued, without foreshots, of course, and when I returned 3 hours later, all smiles and bandages, I just said to Pete, "Nice shot, mate," and we went straight back to work. The talented comedian Hans Connery, who was filming with us on that particular episode, was amazed by it all. He kept walking around saying, "Monkeys is the craziest people." That ended up being caught on film, but nobody watching could have known just how much he meant it. Lester Sill and I left together, and I remember us looking at each other in the car, both close to tears. We knew that the end was not far away. Mike Nesmith said, "Tell the world we're synthetic, because damn it we are. Tell them that we are wholly man-made overnight, and that millions of dollars have been poured into this thing. Tell the world that we don't record our own music, but it is us in the television show. The show really is part of us. They're not watching something invalid." Yet Papa Nez could really warm up to the subject once he got going. He and Peter had been promised more musical control all along. They were the two musicians after all. I could see both sides of it, but there was no shades of grey, only black and white. These big guys were coming on so tough. It was like telling a painter he had to paint by numbers because of a particular method, the particular combination of numbers he had been successful with in the past. The predicted clash of interest between us and Don Kirshner was now well underway. We started demanding creative freedom. We were riding the crest of the wave of our popularity, and faced with Mike's resolution to quit unless his demands were met, Schneider had no alternative but to supply pressure to Kirshner's unbending will. A month later, Abe Schneider sacked Kirshner from his position as president of Col Gems Records, and then Don personally handed in his resignation from Screen Gems Music. The official reason given for his dismissal included refusal to turn over finished masters, generating self-adultery publicity, demeaning the Monkees, issuing an unauthorized third single, and denying Raybert a share of the publishing income. His $35,500,000 suit was settled for an undisclosed amount. Lester Sill, the old head of Colpix and one-time partner of Phil Spector in Phyllis Records, now took Kirshner's place as president of Col Gems. This new situation certainly gave Nesmith and Talk the musical freedom they'd been fighting for. Mike brought his old pal Chip Douglas into the picture, and we did headquarters. Presumably, Peter and Mike were pleased with the result of their newly won freedom. Certainly 2.5 million kids liked it enough to put it into the #1 spot in the American charts. Although this was only half as many that had bought the Monkees' first album, from a strictly business viewpoint, this was justification for some concern in the executive ranks. We started our tour in the summer with the Jimi Hendrix Experience, who had the unfortunate position of having to open for us. On the next tour, the Fifth Dimension had the unenviable spot and fared no better in front of the fans, who would have considered any opening act merely an annoyance and an obstacle between them and their heroes. Filming for the second series of the TV show got underway, even before the end of the first tour. On top of this, Col Gems hounded us for another album, to capitalise on the imminent Christmas spending spree. Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn and Jones Limited. It also made the #1 spot, but only sold a mere 1 million copies. Company heads were now claiming that giving the group artistic freedom had been a big financial blunder, and we found ourselves in a ludicrous position of having sold 30 million records worldwide, yet being pushed to come up with something commercial. We didn't. Our fifth album, The Birds, the Bees and the Monkees, released in March 1968, only reached the #3 and only sold 500,000 copies. We were almost has-beens. All it required was the final touch, which came in the form of Bob Rafelson's brainchild, the Monkees' first and only feature song, Head. Chapter 11, Head. The movie featured some strange guest appearances by Annette Funicello, Frank Zappa, Victor Mature, Jack Nicholson, and the late ex-heavyweight champion of the world, Sonny Liston, whom I went 3 rounds with. Well, just about. But for all this, towards the end of '68, the Monkees were clearly going out as fast as they came in. Our May release, D.W. Washburn, had become our first single that didn't make the top 3, peaking at 19. The TV show had officially been dropped in June after serious conflicts between us and the networks, concerning the style that we proposed for the 3rd series. Our 8th US single, The Porpoise Song, taken from the film, failed to reach the top 50, and Head suffered from poor promotion and general rapid decline of our popularity. It died an instant death at the box office. Nesmith said, "It was one of the projects I was involved in that I was most profoundly proud of. I was just humbly grateful to be involved in one of the most sensational space movies of all time. I think it's Rafelson's definitive work, and better than 5 Easy Pieces." And my reply to that is, what a load of bollocks. The idea came about when the 4 of us, plus Bert Schneider, Bob Rafelson, Jack Nicholson, and about £2 of prime Hawaiian pot, passed a memorable weekend in a hotel in Ojai, California. We left the tape recorder running all the time. And between us, we wrote the whole film in 2 days. Rayburn and Nicholson worked on the script afterwards, but essentially we all wrote it. The idea was to blow the whole image, kill the monkeys. We wanted to have lots of cliches, and it did. Plus it had all these behind-the-scenes cliches too, like we weren't going to get credit for helping write it, that sort of thing. Damn it, it was our grass. Anyway, we didn't get a credit, but it was negotiated somehow or other, and we all went to work. I didn't have a salary. I said I'd take a piece of the movie yet again. We all did. Would I never get it right? It was fun though. Everything we could send up from the TV show, or from our image, we did. We wanted to show how unreal the monkeys' world was. So we'd break reality in the middle of a scene, walk through a backdrop. Mickey gets shot with an arrow and he pulls it out. I've had it with this. Fake sets, fake arrows. I go fighting Sonny Liston. We play dandruff in Victor Mature's hair, the big Victor. Anything and everything. Subtlety. Never heard of the word. But the central idea, if you can spot one, is the black box. We're all kept inside this great big black box, which is supposed to represent society, right? Heavy. And we've each got our own way of getting out, right? Mike's way is to con his way out. He's always the businessman. Peter thinks he can meditate his way out. Probably could have, come to think of it. Mickey jokes his way out. And I'm the fighter, see? Anyway, I don't know what their idea was with the promotion of this film. It was the first time the actual name The Monkees was not used to sell the product. They had an ad on the TV. It was just a face with dark glasses and a voice saying, head, head, head. Real monotonous, over and over. It was weird. After Head, we did only one thing together as a group. It was a TV special, 33 1/3 revolutions per monkey, with Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Fats Domino, Brian Auger and Julie Driscoll. It was directed by Jack Good and received favourable reviews, especially from Variety. But incredibly, NBC put it on against the 1969 Academy Award presentations. I didn't see it. I was watching the Oscars like everyone else. But it was during the filming of this show that Peter told us he was quitting the group. He couldn't stand it anymore. I still believe we were right not to do the third series in the same old style. We'd have ended up parodying ourselves. But whether the direction we took was the right one or not, who knows? We took it anyway. North, south, east and west. There we go again. Mickey flew north for the winter. He never was real smart. Mike headed magnetic south. Peter went far east, right up his own navel. And the Manchester cowboy rode off into the sunset. My dad used to say, "Go west, young man, and don't bloody come back." Peter had his own reasons for leaving when he did, although it appears he was not so concerned with making sure he had a life jacket handy before he abandoned ship, as was Nesmith, who had signed a solo production deal in 1968 with Dot Records. For a short while, Jerry Perenchio continued to act on behalf of the group, now minus Peter. For the first time since we had been doing live appearances, Columbia Screen Gems were not going to do the bookings, so it looked like the group was going to make money for the concerts at last. Screen Gems, however, claimed they owned the name The Monkees, demanding 50% of all gross monies that the three made. Perenchio worked a way around this by having the contracts made out in his name and all fees paid to him, and then he paid the group. Let them sue you, was his advice. All this was academic, though, because since the popularity of the group had dwindled so much, so suddenly, that we were now drawing only half houses. A sad touch of irony, because we had now probably the best live show we'd ever put on, utilising back projections, silent film footage. It was like a review-style show which lasted 2.5 hours, and even got glowing reviews from many of our past detractors. Backed by a 7-piece band, Sam and the Good Timers, our last tour in 1969 ground to a halt at a 10,000-seater venue in Forest Hills, New York. The promoter came to our hotel room and almost embarrassedly told us they'd only managed to sell 3,000 tickets. We decided then to make an official announcement that we were quitting touring to concentrate on recording. With the television show and live concerts over, all that remained to keep us together was recording. The 7th album, the first as a trio, Instant Replay, contained some previously rejected material. Screen Gems were now quite clearly fed up with the group and announced that they had given us what we had demanded for so long: complete artistic control. This, in view of their situation, was kind of like giving us the keys to the city after he had been evacuated. They even put out for the first time ever a single whose B-side was not Screen Gems copyright, thus forfeiting half of the potential publishing royalty. A pretty fair indication of how disinterested everyone was at the label. Carl Gems cannily released the Monkees' greatest hits album. In those days, always a sure sign that the group's hits were a thing of the past. Nowadays, that doesn't necessarily follow. But in 1969, Carl Gems didn't care about how obvious it looked. They just wanted to make what they could out of the old stuff, which wouldn't cost them anything, rather than spend money promoting the new, which they didn't believe in anyway. Consequently, the Monkees' present, a superior album in many ways, was left to die a death. Chapter 12. A little bit you, a little bit me. So a couple of years flew by. 69, 70. What am I doing? I don't like this responsibility business. I was always driving off somewhere, turning my back on it, leaving Linda crying on the stairs. Some stupid thing I'd said to hurt her. I had a 67 Cadillac convertible, a Mini Cooper, a Pontiac blacktop convertible, courtesy of the studio, a Honda 450, a Honda 800, a Velocet 500. Hell, I could drive off every day of the week, north, east, south and west. I went off to Yosemite for 3 or 4 days once. I came back to find David Pearl and Linda riding on my motorbike. She'd never ride on it with me. I was very jealous, always imagining the worst, thinking that they were together when I was not around. I was suspicious of any communication between them. I never really forgave her for going with him, and he never forgave her for marrying me. Jealousy on both sides. She was trapped no matter which way she turned. David Pearl was still around all the time working for me. I should have fired him, but maybe there was another way around it. What could bring us together again? I suggested another baby. She didn't go for it 100%. Maybe wrong timing. Pass the peas, dear. I've been thinking, carrots. I suppose there's no chance of, potatoes would be nice. Yes, thank you. Another baby? We can't afford it, she said. Come on, that's only one more little mouth. What's it going to cost us? Let's get rid of some of these people first, she said, ignoring the issue again. We had a spring clean and lost about 4 house guests, but it didn't really help. I didn't know how to be with just Linda. There had always been a crowd around. About the only difference was it was a treat not having to wait for the bathroom, and maybe having a bedroom to ourselves might have helped too. A few weeks later, little Sarah was on her way. I felt great. Linda didn't. She went to Hawaii to get away from me for a while. I missed her terribly, but I didn't exactly hang out waiting for her. The press, as always, were keen to make any of my friendships into a torrid love affair. It must have been hard for her. When she came back, I cooled out completely. She moved the bed downstairs into the drawing room, and the stereo was moved outside to the guest house. You could put an entire Encyclopedia Britannica between us most nights. Eye contact went south, and total breakdown was not too far away. Still, we salvaged what we could, and around about the 8th month, got it together to go to England and prepare for Sarah Lee. It was becoming fashionable for a wife to ask her husband to be present at the birth of their child, but as I pride myself with being somewhat old-fashioned and a bit of a coward when it comes to these things, on arrival in England, I immediately booked a tour, 10 days in Ireland. Straight off the plane, I hear Davy Jones paging. Davy Jones? My sister Beryl gives me the news this time. It's another girl. I've missed the birth once again. Well, I finished my stint in Ireland, and off we go again. The new family returns to America. But instead of a new start, it's just the same old thing, only heavier, because there are 4 people involved now. Linda did a great job with Talia and Sarah, and I did manage to communicate on some levels. I loved to take care of them. I shot loads of movies at Talia, but Sarah Lee, well, I really wasn't there. I was working. I miss picking her up like I did Talia. I hope she's on film. I got her on 1 or 2 of those other years. Sarah needs to be captured. She's important, special. You see, that's what dads do. They capture the past for the future. Well, they should. I took a picture of about 12 mothers and their children at Talia's first birthday party. Now, 18 years later, they're all divorced. A 60 statistic on film. Chapter 13. Dolenz Jones, Boyce and Hart, and Talia and Sarah. One morning, quite out of the blue, Tommy Boyce called me up and he said, "Jones, idea! Great golden hits of the Monkees, the guys that sang them and the guys that wrote them, Dolenz, Jones, Boyce and Hart. What do you think?" Long pause. "Who is this?" I asked. I love teasing him. He breaks into hysterical laughter, which is what I want from him anyway. He's such a great laugher. The same old lines get him every time. Finally he gets back to normal. "But no, seriously," he tries again. "Sure," I say, but who's these Dolenz and Hart guys?" Off he goes again. That was the start of the magical mystery tour around the world. It's really nice to be here at Disneyland. Indeed it is. Do you know what a treat it is not to have to pay to get into this place? That's only because they thought Tommy was dopey. Laughter all over. It's really nice to be here in Tokyo. We got a standing ovation there and we didn't even know it. It's really nice to be here in Sydney, Hong Kong, Abu Dhabi, bum-de-bum-de-bum-de-bum, and so on, around the globe. It was a much-needed change. I'd felt as though I was stagnating 90 miles from LA, surrounded by all Linda's fashion-conscious people in their trendy wine bars. We were pretty much leading separate lives by now, tolerating each other for the children's sake. So while I was on the road with Mickey, Boyce and Hart, I did all the things I never did when I was 15, 16, 21. Women, booze, I went crazy. Boyce and I really hit it off together, both on and off stage, in and out of the sauna, with selected females. From the Far East China to the Far East New Jersey. Great, great times. 10,000 people came to the first show in St. Louis, and 12 months later, at the same part, just the same amount of people, with just the same enthusiasm and applause. Success followed us on the tour, from concept to conclusion, and after the events of the few months leading up to it, it tasted real sweet. After a year on the road, I came back, and there was nothing there between Linda and I, so I stayed in LA, with Mickey at his place, up on Lookout Mountain in Laurel Canyon. On the night of the Grammy Awards, Linda came back there and started talking about getting separated. I said, "No, it's a divorce or nothing." Then out of the blue she said, "Well, it's coming up to be my birthday. Why don't you get me a divorce?" At that moment, the whole move to Santa Barbara seemed to me to have been just premeditated divorce. She said to me recently, "It doesn't have to be all or nothing." We were talking about the kids. But father, daddy, means to me being there, taking part in the children's life. Something did come from Linda and David, though. Linda and David and Talia and Sarah. And my love for us will never die. It was meant to be. I have a lot to thank Linda for, and I'll always love her in a special way. The affair was over in one night, but our friendship will last forever. Chapter 14, Reviewing the Situation. In December of 1973, I was offered a 6-month theatre engagement back in England. It was a welcome relief from my domestic turmoil back in California. Far easier to immerse myself in work once more and to receive the acclamation of the crowds than to stay and face the work needed in a one-on-one relationship. So off I went to appear in the Peter Nichols play, Forget Me Not Lane. My life with Linda seemed ages away, and I was glad to be back in England working in the theatre again, but somehow I missed her, damn it. The smell and the atmosphere took me back to the Dodger, the West End and Broadway, but there was a guy in the play, Edward Chapman, who took me back even further, to Abdullah and the school play. He was a great guy, old Edward, but he had a terrible habit of suddenly jumping whole lines of dialogue right in the middle of what was usually the most important scene of the play, the one that slots it all together, you know. Sometimes he'd jump whole pages, even entire scenes, and I'd ad-lib like crazy to fill the audience in on what they'd miss. And then, just when it seemed I'd caught up to where he was, he'd jump back to before the part I'd just filled in for, and we'd go through it all again. And then the audience would be thinking, "Boy, this Peter Nichols sure likes to make a point." It was madness. But it was lovely madness. And that's the beauty of live theatre. That's why I went back to the boards, and I always will. I finished with Forget Me Not Lane, but I was soon back in the theatre again. A revival of Oliver at the Music Centre in Los Angeles. The only reason I said that I'd do that was because of Ron Moody. He was supposed to be directing. There was troubles at the end and he didn't direct, but it was tremendous fun acting with him. After 6 weeks in LA, we moved to the Curran Theatre in San Francisco. I'll never forget the last night when Ron was doing his solo scene. He was reviewing the situation. He'd opened his box, he'd counted his money, he'd bitten the pearls to test them, he'd packed his hankies, he'd unpacked his hankies, he'd banged his pans. Just a minute, he banged his pans. That's not in the script. But there he is, still banging his pans. All over the wall, over the counter, on the floor, he's banging his pans. The audience are loving it. He's magic. He's going mad. Now he's packing his hankies again. Now he's unpacking his hankies. Packing them, unpacking them. Still reviewing the situation. Or more precisely, the last verse. And the band are now reviewing their situation, faking like crazy, trying to keep up with him. The management are wringing their hands, mopping their brows, and generally panicking backstage. I'm loving it. Moody's still at it. Packing, unpacking, banging, packing, more banging, reviewing, revamping. It's remarkable. I know I've got to do something, and as I turn around, there's the fireman's axe on the wall behind me. So I take it down and march on stage. I look at the audience. They're in hysterics now, still laughing at Ron, who's just sitting there making Fagin faces. I hand him the axe. Here you are, Fagin. You can change the scene yourself. He has a glint in his eye and he says, "Thank you, me boy. Perfect." He takes hold of the axe and starts breaking up the set. Chops the whole thing down. It's hilarious. What a finish to the show. Things like that are made by just doing them, without thinking about upstaging anybody. That's the magic of live theatre. It was the magic of the monkees, come to think of it. I mean, we worked around a script. There was always the structure, but they gave us the freedom to ad-lib like crazy within the structure. It's now 77, and it's time to review my situation once more. I've got the travelling bug again. The Boyce and Hart experience had strengthened me no end. Thanks, guys, for everything. Maybe it's time to go home. England, I mean. I'd lived more than half my life in America. I decided to give it a try. My plan was to tour for a while on my own and end up on the East Coast, the closest departure point. Off I went. But before I got to the end of the block, Mickey decided he wanted to tour too. My solo became a duet. We created a show. Singers, musicians, costumes, staging, lighting. Hey, wait a minute. This is turning into quite a production. Ah, well, go for it. We opened in a punk club in LA. 4 nights got the act together, then headed for Reno, Nevada, where Mickey fired the brass section and 2 of the singers, leaving his sister Coco and his girlfriend Trina, who he'd met on a DJ B&H tour in Chicago. She was shooting pictures for a Playboy spread, and Mickey went all over town buying up every copy he could lay his hands on. Harry Nielsen decided he couldn't live without me playing Oblio in the London production of The Point, and Mickey decided we should keep the partnership intact. Hey, we could be like Crosby and Hope, Martin and Lewis, Morecambe and Wise. So Mickey was written into the show. It was a real privilege and pleasure doing Harry's wonderful fantasy, The Point. Chapter 15. She. God won't turn his back on us just because I'm divorced. He hasn't got a back. It was clear from the start that there was a unique chemistry between Anita and I. Anita is a playful lady who loves to exercise her one-up womanship on anyone who, like me, wants to be the centre of attention. So I barely got into my storytelling when she started throwing back these witty retorts, right on the nail, as sharp as can be. I pulled out all the stops, my best stories, and if all else fails, jokes. Anita closed her eyes, she slipped down into the chair, and she started making these loud snoring sounds. The coup de grace was when, only a couple of hours after we had met, in the middle of one of my best stories, Anita walked right past me in the middle of the punchline, rummaged around in my kitchen cupboard, and came out with a 2-pound bag of flour, which she emptied over my head. I'd long past trying to match her verbal wits, so I got a bucket of cold water and I poured it right over her. And off we went. If it's possible that any one single act so influences a person that their fate is sealed by it, I'm sure that the flower incident did the trick for me. Whether it registered consciously or not, it's at least interesting to note the connection with a similar incident in Chapter 1 between my mum and dad. I think it's safe to assume that this rang some subconscious bell for me. In any event, It was certainly clear that if we were going to keep meeting like this, we would either end up killing each other or marrying each other. Fortunately, it was the latter. On January the 24th, 1981, at 10:30 a.m. in Swansea, South Wales. We had wanted a church ceremony, but we were told that we couldn't have one because I was divorced. We British can be terribly stuffy about these matters, so they agreed on a civil ceremony at the town hall to be followed by a blessing at the church. It was all set, and then the day before the big day, the vicar said that Anita couldn't wear white in his church because it would be hypocritical. After a heated debate, he relented, but with the stipulation that if she did, she was to cover herself with a cloak and that we had to enter through different doors. I was furious. I ranted and raved, and I said we didn't need to be in his church and have God bless us. He's blessed us already by giving us each other. God won't turn his back on us, you know, because I'm divorced, and do you know why? Do you? Because he hasn't got a back. He faces everybody. He sees everything. So it was a civil ceremony, with only God's and not the vicar's blessing. The intended church congregation were now told to simply meet afterwards at the reception because there wouldn't be room for them in the tiny registrar's office. Not that the tiny registrar would have minded, but that's beside the point. Secretly, however, the entire cast of the pantomime I was appearing in, plus the lighting and sound crew, even the orchestra musicians, all turned out on a cold Saturday morning and waited patiently in the pouring rain for the newlyweds to emerge. And as we did, trumpeters played Here Come the Bride. Stage hands held decorated stage props and swords aloft to form an archway. Others cheered, applauded and threw confetti and rice. It was a lovely gesture from many who wanted to show myself and Anita how much they cared. A reception followed at the local hotel, and my sisters and Anita's family all cried their eyes out happily. My life was a disorganized mess when I met her. Now it's a very organized mess. As my manager, she's worked wonders. You have to be as hard as nails in this business outwardly, or they'll walk all over you. That's something I've never been able to do myself, the management bit. And although Anita is a sweetheart and a softie deep down... yes, darling, I promise I'll do the dishes. Can I just finish this chapter first, dearest? And she's not a taskmistress at all. No, dear, no, I won't forget to fold the laundry. This bit's about you, love. Yeah, oh yeah, can I dust tomorrow? Still, she can put on a surprisingly stern exterior when it's needed at the negotiating table. Anybody who can go up against David Fishoff, our producer of the anniversary tour, on a daily basis and still be a loving mother and a wife when the day is through has my deepest respect. In Fishoff's book, Putting It on the Line, he spells out in detail the strategies he's employed in high-level negotiations in the big league of sports, and more recently, entertainment. He is no lightweight. He deals in millions, and he has a reputation for being tough. So Anita's job in representing me, fleshing out those fine details that may mean a considerable difference when the paycheck arrives, was not an enviable one. Many times throughout the tour, tempers were frayed and complications would inevitably arise. And hard bargaining coupled with subtle diplomacy were needed to keep everyone happy and working under optimum conditions. During one particular grueling test of patience and strength, Anita was trying to field phone calls, pack to leave the hotel, instruct the road managers, sort photos for me to sign and answer my fan letters, plus deal with a dozen other things that were crowding in. Jessica was feeling a little neglected. She'd been asked to amuse herself for a while until the rush was over, but she was tired and she was a bit niggly and irritable, and she started to cry. Both Anita and I stopped what we were doing and we asked her what the problem was. "It's not easy being on the road," she said. "Sometimes you treat me worse than you treat David Fishoff." All hugs around. Jessica was reassured that she was loved very, very much and that Mummy and Daddy were sorry. Another example of Anita's organisational abilities, harnessed to her love for me, was the fulfilment of a lifelong dream for me, to actually ride in a race. It came to fruition just before we were married as a result of Anita's connection with the Playboy organisation and her pushing me to reawaken my belief that I could in fact still do it, even starting so late. All the time I was at Basil Stables I learned a lot about riding, but I never actually took part in a race. So what if it's a bit late to start? It's something I've always wanted to do. Shoemaker's in his 50s, Pigot's in his 40s, why not? I finally got my jockey's licence and all systems will go. September the 19th, 1980 at Newbury Racetrack. I'm riding Speed of Light and we're off. Straight away, those other guys are way in front of me. I'm definitely last, but I'm enjoying it and I'm improving slowly. God, this is hard work. They're turning the bend and I'm getting closer. It's head down and eyes up and I think, hey, wait a minute. I don't want to be looking at all those horses' arses. This isn't a movie. This is for real. So I kick on and Speed of Light's starting to live up to his name a bit and I'm getting real close now. I'm nose and tail with Tim Thompson-Jones and he's making his move. Oh shit, that's me. Tim's made his move all right. He's to the ground. He's fallen off. So I pull around him and I'm making good ground and I'm leaving some of them behind me. This feels good. I'll leave some more standing and now it looks like I'm going to be making a decent showing after all. There's the finishing post. Yay! I went out thinking win, place or stay on, will you? Well, my legs finished way before the end of the race, but I finished 5th and I'm happy. Thanks, Anita. Thanks for pushing me and helping me to live up to my potential. I still want to win the Grand National though, so keep pushing, will you? Chapter 17, This Is Now. It's September the 7th, 1986, and when Mike Nesmith walks on stage at the Greek Theatre Hollywood to join us, it's the stuff dreams are made of. 5 days short of the 20th anniversary of the first airing of the Monkees TV show, the impossible, the improbable, the inevitable happens. We come home to Tinseltown, to the town that made us, and we play and sing together, just the way we always hoped we would, confounding our critics and delighting our fans. Dreams do come true, and good guys win in the end. Just a couple of days prior, we had been on the MTV Music Awards show, featuring such stars as Tina Turner, Mr., Whitney Houston, David Lee Roth and Genesis. And we were there on the screens again, as bubbly and as instantly recognisable as when we originated the whole music video style with the first Monkees episodes. The Royal Flush aired September the 12th, 1966. Now, in retrospect, we know that we were undeniably the first TV video band. We started the whole style, which today virtually is the only way that acts can get their new records to the public. 20 years ago today, we were all but crucified for miming our records on the TV. Yet here we are in MTV land, lip sync city, breaking the rules again. We're singing live. Talk about pop history coming full circle. From Florida to California to New York, Mickey, Peter and myself played big towns, small towns, 700-seater halls, 40,000 plus stadiums. We fulfilled with a vengeance our promise of coming to your town. What started out as a 6-week summer jaunt escalated into a 6-month marathon. As the demand from the fans grew and grew and grew, promoters found themselves swamped with unprecedented rushes on the ticket office. More and more concerts were added, and still the fans were turned away from the overflowing houses. It was clear that the passage of 20 years had not dulled the attraction. In fact, absence had made millions of hearts grow fonder. And we had found ourselves in the middle of Monkey Mania Phase 2. The only difference was our act was sharper, it was funnier, it was musically more accomplished, and of course seasoned with that undefinable chemistry of nostalgia. For the current weenie boppers, the songs are as fresh and new and exciting as they were when they were fresh and new and exciting. They will become for them what they are for us oldie boppers now. The common bond of our uncommon memories. Let's hope it's just not another 20 years. Could it possibly have been that long? It seems like only 17 or so. Well, as the saying goes, what goes round comes round. And except for a few cuts and bruises, we're all in one piece. Mike asked us if he could join us at the Greek Theatre Los Angeles. What a buzz he must have had. I know Peter, Mickey and I were just as excited as the audience was to see him back on the stage. He'd seen our Arlington concert in disguise. He came as Colonel Sanders, I think. Imagine, the only monkey ever to see a monkey concert from the audience. The tour has brought many memories flooding back. To see old fans and new faces listening and singing together, what a sensation. The press have had a very positive field day all around. And apart from eating our dinner at the State Fair under a mortuary tent, it's been great. That and the driver we had at one place, who announced to the whole of the town's CB owners that he had the monkeys on board. We're trying to get back to the hotel after the show, and before we know it, we've got a convoy of trucks and cars and fans, all following our white limousine like a full-page ad procession through town. Monkeys this way, get your monkeys here. Chapter 18, Bits and Pieces. I keep thinking about all the stories I haven't put in that I wanted to. Stories that don't fit neatly into any particular place but need to be in. David Niven, in the introduction to his book, The Moon's a Balloon, apologises for name-dropping but says, in effect, why write about the butler when there's some statesman or other at the dinner table? Something like that, anyway. So this is my name-drop section. Or, as I prefer to call it, my bits and pieces bit. I'm a guy who got lucky, you know, and I've met my fair share of big names, but they don't all have stories because, frankly, many of them who you might think would be scintillating are not actually that exciting in the conversation department, not without a script anyway. I met Linda Lovelace at one of Hugh Hefner's party once, and to be honest, she had nothing to say. Well, it's probably not very fair because she had a sore throat at the time. But there again, everybody's imagination goes into overdrive. Wow, Hefner. But actually, I was there twice and I fell asleep each time. The second time I played ping pong, but I was seeing 3 balls, so I had to let him win. I want a rematch, Hef. Just in the interest of accuracy, when did I start drinking? I haven't yet. Look, I joke a lot about drinking and all that scene, but frankly, when it comes to raising my daughters or giving advice to kids in general, I guess I belong to the do as I say, not do as I do school of thought. I'm against it. I used to like the occasional beer, it's true. Or whiskey, or vodka, and gin, port, brandy, sake, schnapps, champagne, you know, the usual stuff. But the anniversary tour that we've just finished taught me a lot. We did a grueling 6 months. I just can't carry on anymore like I used to. And throw myself around on stage for an hour. It's just not possible. And take this guy, Mooney. I loved him dearly, but he's not around to make me laugh anymore. What a waste. I've lived through a lot of the same stuff and considered myself lucky to have lived through it. Many don't. This is a warning to you kids. The jokes may be funny and all that, but the actual drinking and drug scene is not. People die every day, just like my friend did. Keith Moon. It was in LA, 1967, when The Who came into town on one of their first history-making tours. I spent a late evening with Mooney and Pete Townsend, but I don't remember too much about it except Pete's nose. Remarkable the first time you see it up close. The next time I see Keith, it's totally out of the blue. We haven't kept in touch or anything, and when the opening night of The Point comes to a close, I go backstage and there's Mooney. I'm very surprised and very pleased. He reaches out his hand, smiles and nods his head, and then reaches around my shoulder and gives me a hug. He doesn't say a word, he just smiles and nods. He points to a Guinness that he's brought backstage. He remembers my favourite drink. Or was it Harry? He's drinking champagne and nodding and smiling. The man is magic. Not a word. Finishes his drink and leaves, still smiling and nodding. Harry Nielsen invites a few people back to his hotel suite, and it's the inn on the park, and I turn up about an hour later. The doors open, so I walk in, and who should be sitting there on the couch with Harry but Mr. Magic? He smiles a smile that takes up half the room, and off goes the nodding again. I just smile right back and start laughing. Okay, we'll be nodding acquaintances, no problem. Drinks are poured, and mine hits my Guinness like a ton of bricks. I'm feeling pretty good. The topic of conversation is the show, naturally. It seems Harry's pretty mad at the sound system. Dolan's, who co-starred with me, asks Keith if he thinks the sound was bad. Keith nods, and then he smiles too, which seems to confuse old Skillet Features. Well, it goes on for a while, everybody complaining, but nobody coming up with any answers. Finally, Keith breaks his silence. He offers to lend us some of the Who's equipment that's in storage, stuff they'd used years ago in a smaller tour. They haven't used it since. PA, speakers, microphones, playback monitors, a sound mixing board, the lot. He just sort of throws it out like he's offering to put the kettle on. And then, just to cap it all off nicely, he gives Harry a slip of paper and says, "Anything else you require, old chap? Just give this number a tinkle. Settled." Now, he can sit back and resume his nodding and smiling in peace. After a few more cocktails, the party has dwindled down to Harry and his wife Una, Keith and his lady friend, and me. There's a breeze blowing in from the open French windows which lead out onto the balcony, with this great view of Hyde Park from 9 floors up. I look out towards the Playboy Club, and as I do, something flies past my face and down towards the traffic, floating like slow motion. It's a sock, I think. A white sock. What would a sock be doing flying over Hyde Park Corner at this time of the morning? But then, another one. Then, "That's enough of those." Mr. Magic, ex-occupier of the socks, is at my side. We both lean over the rail and watch 2 pieces of sweaty cotton land amongst the taxis. Well, I think at least it's not the TV, or £200 worth of caviar and cream puffs. I'm sure everyone's heard the stories about Mr. Moon. I suppose compared with deliberately driving his rolls into the pool, a pair of socks over the balcony is harmless enough. It's funny, at that moment I felt I knew what he was about. I had thrown my socks out of a railway carriage window back in '73 during Forget-Me-Not Lane. It was such a feeling of freedom. You know, I wore open-toe shoes for 3 years after that. Yeah, I knew how he felt. But while he was climbing onto the rail, this is a bit different. Why is he sitting here with his legs dangling over Hyde Park Corner? The big smile on his face. Oh my God, he's going to jump. Keith, he nods and smiles. I walk back in the room and I pour myself a large brandy. "Harry, he's on the rail." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Keith, he's sitting on the rail out there. That's what." I'm shaking. "Oh, Keith," laughs Harry. Oh, don't worry about him. He's only joking." "Joking? Right. That's what I figure. No problem." I go back out feeling slightly better. Oh my God. I go straight back in. "Harry, he's really joking this time. He's hanging over the side of the rail with one hand. He's smiling. I swear to God." I down my brandy in one. My mind won't listen anymore. I can see the headlines, the pictures. Keith Moon falls from the penthouse suite balcony. Schmilson, an ex-monkee, accused of manslaughter. This is too much. I pour another large brandy. I sit on the couch and I wait for the phone to ring or for the house detective to start pounding on the door. The phone rings and there's a pounding on the door. The phone is the doorman asking the chauffeur to move the car, and at the door is the chauffeur. At which point Keith comes strolling in from the balcony as cool as you can please. Like he's been doing nothing out there, just stretching his balls or something. "I say, old chaps, anyone for traps?" he inquires. "Mr. Magic, God bless you, wherever you are. Harry Nielsen." Doing a point at the Mermaid Theatre in 1977 was a thrill and a privilege. I've got many fond memories of that period in my life. And besides the Mooney incident, I spent many good times with Harry Nielsen, the writer of the show. Aside from the show, we had another common interest, horses. I was very sad when he left to go back to the States, and I wrote this little song for him. "Goodbye, Harry. We hate to say goodbye, you know. Goodbye, Harry. You didn't have to go, you know. Well, we'll all miss you. You touched us deep inside. England needs you, but you crossed the ocean wide. I'll win the derby, if that's what it takes. I'll win the derby. You've put up the stakes. I'll get you back here, if the derby's what it takes. Hello, Harry. We all make mistakes." Jan Berry. Jan was virtually the first person I saw when I came to live in Hollywood with Ward Sylvester in 1965. We hit Santa Monica Boulevard and there was this big blonde surfer type, 6-footer, slick back hair, great looking, typical California guy. Ward said, "That's Jan Berry." It always stuck in my mind. Later, when we were doing the Monkees, we were recording at RCA, and there he was. Jan and Dean, they were recording some stuff in the next studio. And then a couple of weeks later, I saw him come into the studio with a cast on his leg. He'd broken it, shaving or something, I don't know. He was a pretty wild guy, but he was also taking a degree at UCLA to become a doctor, a dentist, or something like that. Anyway, Jan and Dean had this song, Dead Man's Curve. And a few weeks after I heard it, Jan, who drove a Stingray, was in a car crash. He hit a parked vehicle on the Mulholland Drive and was in a coma for about 6 weeks or so. It was terrible. He was this 20-year-old pop star, doctor-to-be, with a great career ahead of him, and he hit Dead Man's Curve in his Stingray. Well, a year went by, and he came wandering into one of our sessions at RCA again. But now he was this guy who dragged his leg. His hand was all shriveled up, and he couldn't talk properly. That is, he knew what he wanted to say, but it just wouldn't come out properly. It was awful just to know what he had been and what he had become. He wanted to sing with us on the record, but, well, it was just hopeless. His voice was gone. But anyway, we swapped phone numbers and we became real good friends. But I noticed, whenever I'd go up to his house, there'd always be loads of people ripping off his food and using his phone, doing stuff they shouldn't. So I tried to clue him in on what was happening, but he was very lonely. But he wanted their company, and all I could do was watch the way everybody stroked him, and I could see what it was. But anyway, he'd call me up, and he used to talk for hours, or I'd go over and help him with stuff, reading and writing. His hand was gone, so he learned to write all over again. One day, I told him I wanted him to come out on the road with us, on a monkey tour. Get him away from all those people that were using him. Plus, he'd been a big star himself. I thought he'd probably like to come along and watch from the side of the stage, live it again, feel the atmosphere. He really enjoyed it. And when I couldn't give him so much time, there was Marilyn Schlossberg, our helper, secretary, on the road and off. She really helped him a lot with his reading and just giving him time and attention, a great lady. So we took him all over the place, and I got totally involved for about a whole year, a couple of days a week, teaching, helping, talking. We used to sing a song together called Laurel and Hardy. I worked out a little routine on it. Later on, I just kind of stopped seeing him. It wasn't that I forgot about him, but things were not going well for Linda and I, and my life was changing drastically at that point. 69, 70, I was getting involved in all kinds of things myself. I saw him again in 74, though. He just drove up to my place one day. Wow, what a treat. He could talk a little better. He still dragged his leg around, but he drove. He just wanted to say how much he appreciated the friendship that we'd shared. For myself, I felt it hadn't been enough. I could have done more. But I guess you can always go on saying that. The bottom line is, I didn't. My own life was too screwed up. I was hurting and needing. I was in Lester Sill's office one day, and there were a couple of Jan and Dean Billboard awards lying around that Lester didn't want. I still have them. A little piece of Jan Berry. It was lovely seeing him again on the anniversary tour, 1988. It was just like old times. And then there was Lulu. In show business or any other business that exposes you to the media, when you're seen out with a member of the opposite sex, the press immediately assumes that the next stop is marriage. So Lulu and the Monkees shared the same bill at Wembley in 1967. And later on, she visits the Monkees set in Hollywood. And straight away, we're supposed to have marriage plans. It was ridiculous, really. I couldn't have. My girlfriend would have punched me out. Lulu is so sweet. There are two types of entertaining people. She slots easily into the better half. We had lunch and dinner, and our lips did meet. Our hearts beat as one for such a short time. I was doing what I had to do when she was riding her wave of success. I felt lonely and very much in need of a kindness and feeling, and we were very young and moving in a very fast time. We both came from working class backgrounds, and our feelings for each other were very true, and they were very real. In fact, she sent me a telegram. I feel very neglected. Lulu. Sally Field. My most favourite person who worked for Screen Gems was a nun, and a flying one at that, Sally Field. She lived on King's Road and I lived on Queen's Road. They both led up to the same mountain. I would leave my castle on the hill and rap on her door. We'd talk about movies we wanted to see and places we wanted to go and lives we wanted to live. We exchanged problems and cried on each other's shoulders. She was then, and now, most attractive. Like a doll sometimes, childlike. Yet, she could be adult and distant too. I loved to spend time with her. It was a studio friendship which was loved. Phil Oakes. During the Chicago 7 era, Jerry Rubin spent some of his time on the run at Phil Oakes' house. I'd go over there. Got quite friendly with Phil and met Jerry a few times. But my head was obviously in a different place. I didn't fully understand their cause. Phil's songs are wordy and political, but beautiful, a radical poet. He had a kindness that was visible through his deeds as well as his words. I have an album of his. Well, it's a first cut dub actually. He signed it to me. To David, thanks for being a good neighbour. We were at a friend's house for one flowered 60s hippie day, supposedly for the purpose of doing something constructive about the Vietnam War. You paid $200 or something to get into the pool party, and the money was going to buy food for refugees. Everybody was there. All the beautiful people. Well, all those beautiful enough to have a couple of $100 to spare. I can't remember whose house it was, but it was pretty impressive. It had 2 zip codes. So, I walk in, and they're all in robes and beads, and there's enough brown rice going cold to accomplish what the whole thing's about anyway. Peace, love, and waterbeds, man. Donovan's sitting on about 75 satin pillows singing about Jew. I think it was, anyway. But it's all very nice, and I enjoy it better than waiting for Linda to come back from Hawaii, or spending my afternoons at the Pussycat Theatre on Hollywood Boulevard. Certainly, the intentions are good. Probably the whole of the week's top 40, aside from the Beatles themselves, were there. They had great dip. Loads of people sang or offered to tell you their masra. When it became apparent that Donovan was having no luck keeping the sun from setting behind the hills, they decided to draw the raffle and call it a decade. Why a raffle? Well, that's what Phil, who won it, couldn't figure out. They gave him his prize, a gigantic wicker basket filled with every fruit under the sun. I guess he thought, what do I want this for? Aren't we supposed to be feeding the needy? So he put the basket in the pool, and everybody watched it sink and probably thought, why did he do that? Phil immortalised the day in a song later on, Pleasures of the Harbour. One day I went to his place, and it was unlocked as usual, so I walk in. There was half-finished meal, dishes in the sink, dirty ashtrays, unmade bed, but no Phil. Call again later, I thought, but I didn't get the chance. He'd walked out and left his house with everything in it exactly as it was. He flew off to New York, and he hung himself. Jackie Onassis. There are 3 women in my life who, unfortunately, never realised they were supposed to be in my life. Ursula Andress, Anne Bancroft, and Jackie Onassis. I was rehearsing for The Boyfriend in New York, and I needed to change one afternoon, so I decided to go to the boat show. As it happened, that afternoon, fate was arranging one of my more improbable fantasies for me. I'm looking around. Ooh, that's a nice boat. Ah, just what I want. All of a sudden, there she is. Just what I and 12 million other guys want. I mean, even if you had been living in a mud hut for the last 15 years and you'd never read a newspaper or seen TV, you'd have to know that somebody had just walked in. She's surrounded by 8 Secret Service guys. I mean, surrounded. A good 10 or 12 feet away in every direction, but it's clear they're with her. They never stop to look behind themselves. One guy's got 6 machine guns hidden underneath his raincoat. They're real subtle. This is my Jackie O. I have to do something. My dad would never forgive me. I have to tell you, I am in awe. I mean, I haven't been this excited since Willie first woke up to his mission in life. So, straight in at the deep end. At the risk of being gunned down in broad daylight, I walk up to her, my hand outstretched, and she takes my hand and I say, hello, My name's Davy Jones, and I just wanted to say hello. Hello. Suddenly, I know how it feels to be famous. I mean, it's like, what do I say? So what? But she gives me a beautiful smile and says, well, hello, Davy Jones. So, I'm standing there just holding out my hand, and it feels like forever, but it's probably only seconds. And I know that we have something in common, and yet, how do you say that to someone in such a seemingly different world? And now I'm the fan, and she's the unreachable object, so near, and yet I fizzle out with, and goodbye. I turn, wave to the Secret Service goons, and I walk straight into a boat. Oh well, whilst I'm name-dropping, there's 3 guys I guess I should mention. You'd think that having worked with people so closely for a number of years, you get to know them, and to know what makes them tick. But we each had our own little worlds going on, and I'm sure never let ourselves truly discover each other as friends. We were working partners. We each had our own little entourage of people, friends, lovers, teachers, leeches. Like a marriage, if you're lucky enough to survive, you assess your feelings and emotions. What if I had said this or done this? Why didn't I arrive at that point of view then? And so on. So, I'll try now, after a 20-year relationship, to explain Mike, Mickey and Peter, as I saw them then, and as I know them now. I'll start with Peter because he was the most well-rounded of us all. Genuine, reliable and huggable. Peter is a natural person. He really gets off on talent. He loves other musicians and can jam along with the best of them. I saw him holding his own with Hendrix and Stills and Neil Young. He encouraged me no end. He bought me my first guitar and my first drum kit. He went about his work as an actor on studio, showing the same natural approach as he did with his music. He would stop acting and peer through the camera lens to find out how it looked in the middle of a take. Let me look. Wait a minute. I'm not there. Of course I'm not. I'm here. Peter wore what I call drain-pipe trousers. Never really got into the fashions. He had his own. The first guy I ever met who wore different coloured socks. He wore his belt buckle on the side. He hated boots. Always had on sandals or moccasins. He used to walk with a swagger, swinging his arms with a confident air. He calmed hysteria and he lifted depression. Dried bananas, anyone? Piece of orange, smiling, waving, running his hand through his hair. He knew all the crew by their first names. Kids crying at his feet, he lifted and hugged like a father calming a child. Health food was just starting to catch on in the 60s, and Peter was the kind of forerunner in the whole scene. I'm afraid that sort of image was a little thin for 2 other guys I could mention, but I understood. I really did. And I think he knew it. I didn't inwardly agree with a lot of his company, but it didn't keep me from dropping in on him once in a while. Great salads, and always a cold beer to wash down the tofu burgers or brown rice. He's the most musically talented of us all, by a mile. His songs are real. For Pete's Sake, which replaced the Monkees theme at the end of some of the shows of the 2nd season, is one of my all-time favourite songs by anybody. I've joked a lot about Peter giving everything away, but it was true. He was always giving his spare room to someone who needed it for the night. Anyone. And he always seemed far away, somewhere, in a different space. But I'm glad I know him. Of all the things he gave me lots of laughs and food for thought. Mike Nesmith. Nesmith was always a true professional. He and Peter were always concerned about how it sounded musically, or even how it looked. When we did those tight group shots, we were all miming. He'd be the one who'd notice that we weren't plugged in, and he'd put it right just in case the camera picked it up. Nesmith cared. He'd finish a day's filming by climbing onto his motorbike or jumping into his dark blue Cadillac Eldorado that he turned up in on the first day of shooting. Nothing subtle about the Texas kid. Actually, he had a couple of singles on Colpitt's Records prior to the Monkees, so he was doing all right. He always had 2 or 3 cars at the time, come to think of it. But he knew how to look after his money, did Mike. He liked style. Nez and his Cadillac limousine, his English bodyguard chauffeur, Alfie Weaver, and his trained German shepherd killer dog called Frack, who once sank his teeth into my head without leaving the ground. Mike was always bigger and better. Something about being from Texas, I suppose. Hey, what's that? It's Australia, Mike. How much is it? I remember once being over at his house in Bel Air. He just bought it for about $250,000 or something like that. Anyway, he was showing me his pool. A gigantic one it was. He was real proud of it. I'm over there again about 3 weeks later at a party. I think it's Frack's birthday or something. And I noticed that the pool is now indoors. Hey, what's going on, man? This wasn't here before. He'd had it extended, so now it comes in underneath this giant picture window and ends up just short of the bar. A great idea, I say. It needed something. The party's in full swing, and suddenly Nesmith decides he's got to have a hamburger, and he hasn't got any in the house. He's got hundreds and thousands of gallons worth of Olympic swimming pool right in his front room, but he's forgot the hamburgers. Who wants a hamburger? He asks. Nobody, apparently. Everybody's either swimming or getting bitten by Frack, so Nez leaves. There's no shortage of wine, at least, and though I don't usually drink, as you know, I think, what the hell, it's Tuesday. Well, it's getting dark, and there's no sign of Nesmith, but the party just keeps rolling on. Much later, the phone rings. It's for you, Davy. I pick up the receiver. Loud traffic noises. Hey, you should have come with me, man. These are great hamburgers. Sounds like it. Where are you? Dallas. He'd taken a jet to go eat at his favourite hamburger stand back in Texas. I like that. Style. I still maintain that at any given moment he could become Hollywood's next leading man. A truly great talent. A very funny man. He'll probably become the governor of Texas next, but I wish he'd get rid of that dog, Frack. Mickey Dolenz. Who? Oh, Mickey, right. Well, he's a different skillet of fish altogether. Now, if you ever saw Mickey on the Monkees show, he was playing himself. A tough role, but somebody had to do it. Mickey's the kind of guy who buys a do-it-yourself gyrocopter. He gets all the huge parts laid out in his living room. It takes forever to make the thing. Everybody's falling over bits of gyrocopter for weeks. Nobody wants to visit him because they know they'll have to sit on a rotor blade or something. Finally, he gets the whole thing assembled. Right, let's take it out and fly. But it won't go through the door. He has to completely dismantle the thing to get it outside. I don't think he ever did build it up again. He got bored with it. He once bought this most beautiful, incredible 1929 Bentley. It cost him a fortune. He had it flown over from England and delivered to his house. We were all there to see it. It was gorgeous. British racing green, original paint job. Well, there it was, and we're all looking at it and sitting in it and wondering if we dare take this beautiful piece of art onto the open road. We decide to wait. So, we're all inside having tea, admiring how half-finished gyrocopter obscures the view on just about everything, when we hear this strange squeaking, crunching sound. We get to the door just in time to see the car rolling backwards off the driveway. Mickey goes chasing after it, but it's all downhill. It winds its way for about 50 yards, up an embankment, turns over, and lands on its back. The most beautiful car in the world dead. He'd left the handbrake off. Fortunately, he bought himself a 1926 Rolls Royce as well, so the day wasn't completely ruined. I like Mickey a lot. I've got a lot of respect for him and his talent. It's just that we rub each other the wrong way sometimes, like whenever we're in the same country. But that's because he loves to wheel and deal, and sometimes when he starts the wheeling and dealing, he goes straight for target, and his generous nature and better judgment take a back seat. I must say, though, that after doing the 6-month anniversary tour with him, I've changed some of my opinions that I formed about him over those trying years. I'm sure he had just as many difficult dealings with me. That's probably what has made us so close on stage and so distant in life. To hear him admit to me, before the tour started, that he'd been dissatisfied with his life and his career for some time, and that he just wandered around the grounds of his mansion in England and actually cried. I tell you, that upped my respect and feeling for him quite a few notches. I guess none of us knows what the other has really gone through, Hey, Skillet Features, write us your book, will you? Well, it's been a pleasure being with you, and it's been nice talking to you, or talking at you, whichever you prefer. I've just got one little PS to add here. I haven't found it hard to remember all this so far. What is hard is to write a complete chapter on each of the guys. I've attempted it a couple of times, but it just won't come out right. I've been honest, and I found it's just a bit too personal for this book. A cop-out? I don't think so. Who says what a biography should say anyway? After all, They Made a Monkey Out of Me is the name of this book. So, let's just leave the monkeys the way that we found them. Smiling, running, joking, and the best of friends. Bum, de bum, de bum, de bum.